Chapter 595. The roar was soon exhausted. Dean felt his heart was empty. He lay quietly on the ground, looking up at the slowly moving dark clouds in the sky, listening to the fierce biting and gnawing sounds coming from his left arm. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He slowly raised his right hand and gently hugged her back. If I can hug you like this all the time, how good would that be? Gulp. Aisha's throat issued a series of low, beastly roars, like a ferocious beast. The sound of biting was accompanied by the sound of swallowing thirstily. Dean's eyes slowly moved down to her body. There was a trace of tenderness in his empty and numb eyes. His palm gently stroked the silky hair on her head, like stroking a kitten curled up in his arms. Aisha was startled when he touched her head. She suddenly raised her head. Her beautiful face was full of fierceness. She glared at him ferociously with half a piece of crystallized flesh in her mouth. Dean just looked at her gently. His eyes were extremely gentle, as if saying, "Don't be afraid. I will always be here." Aisha suddenly opened her mouth and rushed to bite his neck with her sharp teeth. Whoosh! Dean's right hand that was stroking her hair suddenly turned and pressed against her neck. There was a bit of pain and sadness in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, roar." Aisha ignored him and rushed over with a fierce roar. Dean's arm tightly pressed against her neck. He felt that although his strength was inferior to hers, he seemed to be able to suppress her. It was reasonable to say that with her physique, it would be easy for her to kill him. But judging from the power she erupted, it seemed that she didn't have the original extraordinary fighting power. The two people were in a stalemate for a few minutes. Suddenly, the pure black pupils of Aisha, who had been desperately biting, suddenly contracted deeply. It was as if the middle of the pupil was sucked into a black hole. The black curtain on the eyeball was pulled in, so that the edge of the eye revealed a trace of snow-white color. Dean was startled for a moment. Roar! Aisha suddenly raised her head and roared towards the sky. Her fingernails grew again and became sharper. At the same time, a sharp horn slowly protruded from her forehead. It was the posture of Aisha's fourth awakening. As the roar faded, her body suddenly tilted to the side, twitching as if she was having a spasm. Her arms, chest, and other parts of her body emitted the sound of bones rubbing against each other. Dean sat up from the ground. Seeing this strange scene, he was a little stunned. At the same time, a glimmer of hope suddenly welled up in his heart. Could it be that her consciousness had not completely disappeared and she was fighting with the Zombie King virus in her body? Although he knew that the possibility was very small, he couldn't help but feel nervous. At the same time, he was afraid that his hope would be dashed again. Caca. At this time, Aisha's back suddenly issued a fierce sound of bones crashing. The protruding horns on her forehead extended outwards, as if they wanted to completely pull out from her body. Ah! Aisha roared towards the sky. Her beautiful and ferocious face was full of pain, and her hands were tightly holding her head. Seeing this scene, Dean couldn't help but clench his fists, as if the pain she was suffering was happening to him. In a high-pitched, painful roar, Aisha held her head and desperately smashed the ground. The horns pierced the ground and pierced a hole. Suddenly, she roared and opened her mouth to bite Dean in front of her. Dean's face changed slightly. He was about to retreat, but soon he stopped. He saw that halfway, her roar stopped abruptly. Her arms softened, and her body softly fell down. Dean was startled. He immediately stepped forward and turned her over, but he saw that she had fainted. What's going on? Dean was at a loss. But soon he thought that no matter what, while she was unconscious, he should first find a safe place. If she woke up and her consciousness recovered, it would be the best thing. But if she still looked like this after waking up, then he must find a way to subdue her. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, I won't give up on you. Dean picked her up and firmly said, "If you can hear me, you must hold on. You won't lose to the corpse poison." Speaking of this, he took a deep breath and looked up at the surroundings. Everywhere he looked, there was a barren land of rocks. Suddenly, the ruins that he had explored before flashed in his mind. His eyes suddenly lit up. It was an excellent safe place in the ruins. However, he had worked hard to rush out of the ruins. If he wanted to return to the ruins, there would be countless wandering corpses in the middle, which was extremely dangerous. Soon, he threw the idea of danger out of his mind and quickly turned around with Aisha in his arms. It didn't take long for Dean to see a group of wandering corpses in the distance. He glanced at them and quickly pulled out the corpse powder from Aisha's backpack. He poured out half a bottle and applied it to his body. Then he picked up a stone from the ground and threw it in another direction. The stone fell to the ground. Hearing the sound, the group of corpses immediately wandered away. Dean immediately picked up Aisha and ran quickly. The only thing that could be used at the moment seemed to be the weakness of the corpses, that they had no IQ. After he ran closer, at the end of the group of zombies that had been attracted by the sound of the stone, a few zombies heard Dean's footsteps and turned around slightly. Their festering facial features were distorted, tilting their heads to look at Dean, and swayed their bodies as they walked toward him. Dean glanced at them, and his face changed slightly. But soon he noticed that these corpses were not rushing towards him. His heart was relieved. It seemed that the effect of the corpse powder was very good. It perfectly covered up his smell, so that these corpses could not recognize him at all. However, hidden corpse powder is not absolute. It may not be effective against some high-level walking corpses. Especially for the Corpse King, it is useless. Whoosh! Dean ran at full speed in the wilderness. Although for the sake of safety, he should take a detour. But compared to these loose corpses, he was more worried about the awakened Aisha. If she was still in the previous state, he may not be able to break free from her hands. However, Dean had some doubts in his heart that he could resist her bite before. But he didn't know much about the structure of the corpses and the process of corpse transformation. He couldn't think of any reason, so he could only leave it for later. In a blink of an eye, more than half an hour passed. Dean encountered hundreds of corpses on the way back, but they were all small in number. The previous corpse tide was completely loose after losing the rule of the Corpse King. Among these hundreds of corpses, there were some relatively high-level corpses, but fortunately, there were no giant corpses like the previous encounter. Judging from the previous battle, there seemed to be only 2 giant corpses in this corpse group. And judging from a reaction of the dead Reynolds, a Corpse King could get the protection of 2 giant corpses. It seemed that it was already a very great existence. Damn it! Dean looked at a giant shadow wandering out from behind a gravel in front of him, and his face suddenly became ugly. This was a giant walking dead. Its physique was similar to that of a high-level limitless person, but its fierce fighting style would be difficult for the pioneers to deal with. The distance was too close, and it was too late to detour now. Dean clenched his fists, and his eyes showed madness, ready to fight to the death. As the distance approached, just when Dean was ready to accelerate and rush over to take the lead, suddenly his footsteps slowed down and the speed slowed down. He looked at the giant walking dead incredibly and saw that it was facing him, squatting down, and its hands were tightly holding its body, shivering, and it seemed to be very afraid. Afraid? The walking dead that had no pain would be afraid? Dean was stunned. Suddenly, he thought of the head of the black-winged Corpse King on his belt. Could it be that this giant walking dead smelled its smell, so was afraid? Thinking of this, he stared at the giant walking dead. It should not be a disguise. Except for the black-winged Corpse King and the giant corpses hiding in the ground to ambush Eureka, he did not seem to see other walking dead with intelligence. Whoosh! He didn't stop and quickly rush past it. When he got rid of it for hundreds of meters, Dean found that its trembling stopped, and it slowly stood up, continued to shake its body, and wandered to another place. Seeing this, Dean was relieved and turned to look at the head of the black-winged Corpse King tied behind him. He didn't expect that the resentful desire at that time would play such a big help at the moment. He was more confident in his heart, holding Aisha and sprinting forward at full speed. After encountering the giant god's corpse, he encountered some beastified, strange walking corpses, but without exception, these high-level walking corpses would stop wandering when they were within a few hundred meters of him. They would crouch and shiver, or curl up. Ordinary walking dead and low-level walking dead did not have such a performance, but when he passed by, they immediately turned and wandered in the other direction, seeming to want to stay away from it. Dean felt that such a reaction should be from the effect of the hidden corpse powder on him. I don't know how long it took. When Dean felt a little sore and numb in his legs, he finally came to the ruins again. There were dozens of walking dead wandering here, at different stages, wandering along the entrance passage under the gravel. Dean picked up 2 stones and collided them outside. The sound soon attracted the walking dead in the passage. One of the giant walking dead had not yet climbed out of the passage. It curled up on the ground, shivering, causing the body to roll down the slope. Dean waited for some undead to be drawn out. Then he picked up Aisha's body again and quickly went down the ramp. Soon, he came to the passage where he had fought with Eureka and others. There were still fragmented corpses of undead on the ground. Dean soon came to the door of the ruins and saw that the huge door of the ruins was still open. There were dozens of walking dead wandering in the dark ruins. He frowned slightly, picked up a stone from the ground, and threw it outside. Soon, the walking dead in the ruins heard the movement, immediately shook their bodies, and slowly walked towards the stone, but stopped halfway. Dean had to throw the stone again. He found that the auditory system memory of these undeads was very short, and the amazing thing was that they obviously had no wisdom and would be attracted by the sound source, but they would not be attracted by the footsteps of each other. This made Dean have some ideas to study them, but not now. After attracting these walking dead, he quickly came to the ruins with Aisha in his arms. He turned and glanced at the door of the ruins, but he did not see the valve to close the ruins. Could it be that the ruins were closed from the outside? This idea was rejected by him as soon as it emerged. There was no valve or hidden valve to close from the outside. Even if there was a hidden valve, it was unlikely to be closed from the outside. He came to the circular hall in the ruins and gently put Aisha on the ground. He stared at her sleeping face and turned his head to look around. He quickly went to the surrounding wall and reached out to gently knock on it, looking for a hidden valve. In the middle of the search, Dean suddenly thought of the small door in the pile of bones. He could not help but move his heart. He quickly came to the pile of bones and pushed the high pile of bones away. Suddenly, there was a collapse sound. The bones that had long been rotten fell instantly, raising countless dust and broken bone powder. Dean covered his nose and walked to the small door in the dust. He saw that it was a pure metal door, 2 meters high, which was the standard height of most doors in the old era. At the height of the door, there was a horizontal window similar to tempered glass, which was now covered with dust. Dean wiped the dust and saw the scene inside through the transparent glass. It was not a place where treasures were stored as he thought, but a small room similar to the console of an airplane. There were many instruments, several corpses on the ground, and some scattered papers and books. Dean was a little disappointed, but it was also within his expectation. Presumably, this was the main console of the shelter. He looked around and found that the door had no handle. There was a device similar to a doorbell on the metal wall next to it. He looked at it and gently pressed it. There was no response. He tried to press it a few more times, but there was still no response. He cursed in his heart and punched the door. Bang! The door was suddenly hammered open. Dean was stunned. The next moment, he found that the door was not closed at all. In a gap of the door, there was a palm of bones. He immediately pushed the door and saw that the console was very messy. There were 4 corpses on the ground. Oh no, it should be 5. He also saw some scattered bones, arm bones and human hip bones. In addition to the scattered bones, the other 4 corpses were hugging each other, a man and a woman. The woman's hair was white, and there was a ruby necklace on her neck. It was very delicate, but it was covered with dust. The other 2 corpses, one on the console, and the other fell by the door. Dean glanced coldly and saw a group of crumpled papyrus in the abdomen of the corpses. He frowned slightly and faintly guessed what happened here. If the survivors outside starved to death, the people inside should be the same. The only bookshelf in this room was pushed to the ground. The books were torn and scattered everywhere. They became the food for these people before they died. Even if they lived on papyrus, they still couldn't wait for rescue and starved to death. No wonder there were so many bones outside the door. It should be the people outside who wanted something inside, food, or the hope of life. Dean was silent for a moment. He pushed away the bones that fell on the console. Suddenly, all the bones were broken and piled up on the ground. He picked up a piece of papyrus on the console and looked at it. It was the Western Bible of the old era. His heart moved slightly. He turned to the fallen bookshelf next to him, wiped off the dust, and picked up a few books from it. Soon, he found that these books were classic books in different fields. They were also the essence and symbol of human civilization. Originally, it was planned to let these people live and pass on the civilization. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. There was a trace of emotion in his heart. His father also had such expectations for him. However, such a great thing as passing on the entire human civilization eventually couldn't resist the most primitive instinct, hunger. There were dozens of torn books on the ground. They were scattered everywhere and became the only rations of the 5 people inside. The person with the scattered bones had most likely become the rations of the other 4 people. Dean looked at it and put down the book in his hand. He turned to the console and looked at the many mechanisms. His brows slightly wrinkled. At this moment, a slight sound rang behind him. Dean suddenly looked back, and the cold vigilance in his eyes suddenly melted. He didn't know when Aisha quietly stood up and walked towards him step by step. Her body was swaying like a baby who had just learned to walk. Dean was relieved to see her wake up. He was about to speak when he suddenly noticed that her eyes were dark and her palms were clawed. This was a posture to launch an attack at any time. His heart sank. Roar. Seeing that Dean noticed her, Aisha roared fiercely. Her beautiful face was full of ferocity. She opened her mouth and rushed over. Seeing her like this, the last glimmer of hope and fantasy in Dean's heart was also shattered. He kicked the half-open door, and with a bang, the metal door slid and locked. Bang! Chapter 596. Dean's heart sank. He quickly leaned sideways against the door, using his body to block it. At the same time, his peripheral vision quickly swept around the room, looking for an escape route. However, the messy scene in the room made him not have too much hope in his heart. Bang! A low sound of impact came from outside the door. Dean, who was leaning against the door, felt a slight tremor. He was slightly startled and could not help but look up. He saw Aisha's ferocious face close to the glass window. Her beautiful face was full of ferociousness, and her sharp teeth were dripping with saliva. She waved her arms and vigorously smashed the door. Every time she smashed the door would vibrate slightly. Dean was a little stunned as he felt the magnitude of the vibration. With Aisha's strength, it was reasonable to say that she could easily tear the door. However, the movement caused by the impact at the moment was like an ordinary person hitting the door outside. There was not too much strength. What happened? Has her strength degenerated so weak? While Dean was puzzled, Aisha continued to hit the door without stopping. But each seemingly fierce impact only made the door tremble slightly, and there was no sign of it breaking. Dean was a little relieved when he saw this. He slowly retreated a few steps in doubt. Soon, he noticed a phenomenon. Except for the low thudding sound of Aisha hitting the door, he didn't hear Aisha's roar. However, from the glass window, he could clearly see her roar. In other words, her voice was completely isolated by the door. It was obviously close at hand, but no sound penetrated through. It's not that her strength has degenerated, but the material of the door is too tough. Dean's eyes flickered slightly. He felt that this was a little more likely. Since this place was called a shelter and could withstand the impact of a disaster, the general metal material should have long decayed, but there was no sign of oxidation or rust on the surface of the metal here. Puff! While Dean was guessing, Aisha suddenly raised her claws and slammed the window on the door. The transparent window that had accumulated dust did not break on the spot, but was dented by her claws. Dean was startled. He immediately knew that the window on the door was not tempered glass as he had previously thought, but a more advanced synthetic material with a little glue component. It was very tough. Aisha roared. raised her claws, and pounced again. With a hissing sound, the recessed window was immediately pierced through by her sharp claws. Buzz! Suddenly, an alarm sounded in the room, and a red light shot out from the small holes on the wall beside the control panel. At the same time, an electronic voice came from the control panel with all kinds of buttons and joysticks. Alert! Warning! You have been hacked. Do you want to activate the attack system? The same words were repeated over and over again. Dean was stunned for a moment, but immediately said, "No, turn off the alarm." However, the siren continued to sound. The siren passed through the small hole in the window. Aisha, who was attacking the window, became more and more crazy. She roared and waved her claws to attack. Dean woke up and immediately said in English. After he finished, the alarm stopped. Without the interference of the alarm, Dean immediately heard Aisha's roar coming from outside. He turned his head and saw that Aisha had completely pierced a hole in the window. One of her arms had stretched in through the hole. The nails on her white palm were extremely sharp. She tried to grab Dean, but she couldn't touch him, who was standing 1 meter away. Dean's eyes flashed with a trace of grief as he saw her crazy appearance. He took 2 steps back again. Roar! Aisha roared ferociously and tried to grab him. Dean looked at her dignified and beautiful face. He bit his lips slightly. After a moment, he took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm sorry. I promised you that I will live. I will live well." Roar! Aisha heard him speak and immediately issued a more intense roar. Dean stared at her and slowly turned his head. His eyes swept around the room, and his brows slightly wrinkled. Although he wanted to live, this door seemed to be the only exit. If he wanted to leave here, he must let Aisha leave this door first. He couldn't bear to do so. Let's not talk about whether or not he could lead her away. Once Aisha left the ruins, there was only one end for her. She would completely become a wandering ghost. She would wander aimlessly in a wasteland full of monsters and zombies. Maybe she would wander into the humans' fortress and be besieged by humans. Maybe she would wander deeper into the dark wasteland and become the prey of more advanced monsters. Even if she could survive, but at that time, where'd he go to find her? The world was so big, but how insignificant were humans? Dean was silent for a moment. He went around the room and gently knocked on the wall. He listened to the echo to see if there was a secret door. After checking around, Dean's mood became heavier. The thickness of the wall seemed to have reached an inestimable level. Even with his hearing, he couldn't hear the slightest echo. If I had the previous magic mark of the fear-stained, maybe I would have a chance to leave. Dean couldn't help but secretly regret. The metal-cutting ability of the fear-stained could let him come back to life here. However, if he had the magic mark of the fear-stained, maybe he wouldn't be alive now. He would have died countless times in the previous battles. Fish and bear's paw always can't have it both ways. He squatted slightly and pondered without saying a word. Roar! Aisha seemed to be tireless. She roared and tried to reach out to grab him, but her arms had stretched to the limit. She could only wave in the air in vain. After thinking for a long time, Dean suddenly thought of a point. The sound insulation effect of this door was so strong that it should be absolutely sealed. Even water couldn't penetrate. In this case, the oxygen inside should be scarce soon. It was impossible to wait for the 5 people to starve to death. They would suffocate because of the lack of oxygen. So, there's a vent in here. Dean's eyes suddenly lit up. He looked around to find a place for ventilation. After searching for several times, Dean found nothing. Even the ground under his feet was checked by him. He still couldn't find a place similar to a vent. He stopped and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of a way. He immediately squatted down and picked up a few bones of skeleton on the ground. He took out the dagger on his leg and scraped the surface of the bones. Soon, he scraped out a piece of bone powder. At the same time, he used the dagger to scrape the dust on the ground together. It didn't take long for a lot of dust to be collected under his feet. He picked up a handful, stood on a chair, and came to the high place of the room. He gently blew the dust in his hand around and then squinted his eyes. The dust quietly drifted down, but the dust that was drifting towards the wall was pushed back by a gentle force, and then slowly fell down. Dean's eyes lit up. He immediately came to the wall. Soon, he found a vent in this room. It was impressively in the gap of the corner of the metal wall. Dean immediately tried to use the dagger to pry open the gap of the wall. However, the corner of the wall was completely two metal walls. The dagger in his hand couldn't pry open it at all. In the depth of the gap, there was a faint, fresh air floating. There was a ventilation pipe that was supplying air to the control room. However, it was completely unrealistic to drill out from here. Dean angrily punched the wall. He had finally found a glimmer of hope, but it unexpectedly failed. He was angry, but at the same time, there was a trace of disappointment in his heart. He slowly squatted down and fell into contemplation. Roar! Aisha roared unconsciously outside the door. Time passed quickly. Dean gradually became a little annoyed. He couldn't think of any other way out. He stood up and looked at the dense buttons and joysticks on the console. There was a trace of an anxious expression on his face. Suddenly, he froze. This was just a shelter. Why was the control room so complicated? He had previously seen the shelter outside. It seemed to be just a large warehouse without any equipment. There was no need to configure such a console. Soon, he thought of the previous alarm. His eyes slightly moved. So, this console seemed to be controlling the weapon system here. Thinking of this, he walked over to the control panel and looked at the red and green buttons, muttering to himself. He didn't dare to press randomly. If he accidentally activated any device, he would die faster. Even if he didn't activate any device, but if he accidentally activated the door, then Aisha would immediately rush in and tear him to pieces. He didn't think that the door could only be closed by manual. Among these buttons, it was likely that there was a control mechanism to open and close the door. Thinking of this, he suddenly lost the idea of trying. He turned around and glanced at Aisha at the door. Soon, he retracted his gaze and sat on the chair next to him. When his arm rested on the back of the chair, he suddenly remembered that his left hand had been bitten by Aisha. When he looked at his left hand, he suddenly saw that a large piece of the left arm's bicep was bitten off. In addition, his left hand had been crystallized. The bitten part had turned dark, like a mass of frozen thick ink that was slowly fading away. Dean's heart sank when he saw this. He was not worried that he would be infected, but Aisha could actually transmit the ptomaine to him through biting. This showed that the ptomaine in her body didn't only spread in her body, but had completely mixed with the blood in her body. In such a situation, even if it was not ptomaine, if it was replaced with other toxins, it would basically be beyond cure and death was inevitable. If that was the case, then her sudden convulsions and fainting earlier were most likely not the stubborn resistance of her consciousness against the corpse poison that he had thought. Instead, her body was being modified by the corpse poison, and as she gradually adapted, her body began to convulse instinctively. Thinking of this, he slowly looked up at Aisha's arm that stretched out from the window. There was a burst of sadness in his heart. He only felt that the beautiful face was getting farther and farther away from him. After a long time, he slowly calmed down, holding a dagger to cut off the thick black part of his left shoulder. The crystallized arm made the ptomaine that penetrated into it spread extremely slowly. Because of the crystallization, the self-healing ability of his left hand was also very slow. However, there was no pain. Although the wound on his arm looked extremely frightening, he didn't feel a trace of pain, so it didn't affect his actions. After dealing with the wound, he slumped on the chair and silently looked at Aisha. Although her face was ferocious, her eyebrows were still beautiful, making him vaguely recall the previous scenes. In the ice cave, in the wilderness, in the fortress in the memory, the decadence on his face gradually dissipated, and there was a faint smile. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Dean stayed in the control room without eating or drinking, but because there was no strenuous exercise, he was able to support himself. But the feeling of hunger still came from time to time. He couldn't help but think that maybe he would be trapped here and starve to death like the 5 people here. During the rest, he thought about the way to leave, and at the same time, looked through the scattered books on the ground, hoping to find an instruction manual that introduced the relic console. But after 2 days of searching, there was no one related to the shelter. All of them were great books that represented the civilization of the old era. Spiritual food? Haha. Dean threw away the great book about human history in his hand. He stroked his slightly growling stomach, feeling a little bitter. He leaned against the bookshelf and looked up at the console with complicated buttons. In the past 2 days, he tried to communicate with the intelligent system in the console in English, but the latter didn't pay attention to him. Perhaps the clever intelligent system heard his voice, and it wasn't the voice of authorization? He felt a little powerless as he thought about it. Roar. Aisha growled and twisted her palm slightly. After 2 days of growling, the frequency of her growling seemed to have decreased. Dean turned his head and looked at every inch of her face. Was it that the only way to survive was to lead her away? But that also meant that he would lose her completely. In the future, he wouldn't even be able to see her current appearance. Why did he always have to face such a painful choice? Why did he always have to choose between yes and no? He felt a little tired. He looked up at her silently, just wanting to engrave her appearance in the depths of his soul. Time passed little by little. Grumble. Dean lowered his head and reached out to touch his stomach. He thought bitterly. Do you feel hungry too? Do you want to eat? Don't scream, he said to his stomach. After that, he looked up at Aisha again, but the next moment, he suddenly froze. Scream? My stomach growls when it's hungry? He was startled. His eyes slowly widened, and his face showed a strong shock. There was even a trace of disbelief and excitement on his face. Scream. My stomach will scream when it's hungry. Dean suddenly sat up and clenched his fists. He felt his whole body was excited. He couldn't help but look up at Aisha, who was looking at him with a ferocious face. He suddenly had an impulse to rush up and hug her. Chapter 597. Roar. Aisha heard the sound and roared as if she was disturbed. Dean looked at the beautiful and ferocious face of a girl and slowly stopped laughing. Now, he had recognized the reality. The proud and gentle Aisha can't come back anymore. Miracles would not happen to him. In that case, he could only create miracles by himself. I will let you return to your original appearance. Dean's eyes were extremely gentle. He stared at her and whispered softly, like a whisper to the most passionate lover. Roar. Aisha roared even more ferociously when she heard the sound. Dean slowly stood up. Although he was in a desperate situation at the moment, his heart burst with a strong desire to live. The sadness, depression, and dejection after seeing Aisha's corpse had all disappeared at this moment. When a person's stomach is hungry, it will cry. This is an instinctive reaction. This is a conditioned reflex. Dean took a step forward and came to the front of Aisha's claw. His eyes were extremely gentle. Believe me, I will let you return to your original appearance. Aisha roared angrily and struggled to squeeze into his arm. Dean saw her sharp fingertips grow a little, and the confidence in his eyes increased a little. Conditioned reflex. This phenomenon did not only exist in conscious life forms, but also in unconscious undeads. When he was still a scavenger in the early days, he had observed that the zombies would be attracted to sound sources and heat sources. Even if the sensory organs of the zombies were completely rotten, they could still accurately track the prey and lock the position of the prey. This was caused by such other factors. And this just proved that undeads also had the ability to receive information and analyze. Although the ability to analyze was very weak, they would not be attracted by each other's footsteps, but by each other's roars. This showed that they still had a certain degree of information analysis ability. And the existence of these abilities meant that they also had conditioned reflex. When they heard the sound source, they would gather. When they smelled the blood, they would salivate. These reactions belonged to their conditioned reflex. Moreover, because they had no consciousness, the actions of undeads were completely based on conditioned reflex. If it wasn't for the inspiration that flashed in Dean's mind when his stomach was growling, he wouldn't have taken the conditioned reflex, which was a phenomenon that he was accustomed to and didn't even include in his thinking. However, This common phenomenon that most people would not notice had ignited his incomparable hope and faith. What can a conditioned reflex do? When a person's finger was burned by a flame and hurt, they would reflexively withdraw their hand. When the smell of food, people will instinctively feel hungry. It was a kind of conditioned reflex. This was also the main method of taming police dogs and other animals in the olden days. Undeads also have conditioned reflexes. Can they be tamed in the same way? Although he hadn't tried it yet, Dean had great confidence in his heart. She's acting like this because of the information I'm emitting, making her think that I'm something delicious. That's why she wants to pounce on me and bite me. However, she won't bite a stone. It's not that the stone doesn't emit information, but she's received the stone's information. After analyzing it, she came to the conclusion that the stone can't arouse her desire to attack. Dean's expression was particularly serious. His eyes flickered slightly, thinking about ways to tame her through conditioned reflex. He knew that once he completed the taming, he could keep her by his side forever. This was the last desire of his life. If I can make her information processing confused, change her conditioned reflex, and make her think that I'm a stone, then she won't attack me. Dean frowned and thought, in this case, first of all, I have to make her no longer respond to blood, but this seems a bit wrong. Undeads thirsted for blood, just like humans thirsted for food. Instincts were the hardest things to change, and there was no one else. He held his chin and pondered for a moment. Soon he knew where his mistake was. People in the olden days used conditioned reflex to tame police dogs, not to suppress the instinct of police dogs. On the contrary, they used some instructions to replace what the instinct of police dogs needed. Use conditioned reflex to add instructions to tame. Dean muttered to himself. After pondering for a moment, he gradually understood that if he wanted to use conditioned reflex to tame Aisha, he must first establish order. For example, feeding on time, prohibiting roaring, and so on. Thinking of this, he sat cross-legged and began to draw up a taming plan in his mind. When he was halfway through the idea, his stomach growled again. He immediately stopped and frowned. Not to mention the training plan for the time being, his own survival had become a big problem. He looked up at Aisha. His action immediately aroused Aisha's reaction. Her face cracked into a sinister color as she roared. Dean was silent in his heart. Did he really have to lead her away first? Once she was led away, how could he get her back? While he was thinking in his heart, he suddenly caught a glimpse of the ground under the console in front of him. There were slight dents and cracks. The ground? Dean suddenly reacted. He couldn't help but look at the ground under his feet. He reached out and touched it. Yes, the ground was not made of metal, but concrete. Moreover, after more than 300 years, the concrete here was like molting in a sealed, dry environment. Dean was a little excited. He couldn't help but want to pat himself a few times. He should have noticed this a long time ago. I should have thought that the ground couldn't be made of metal. According to the understanding of the people in the old era, the ground itself had the thickness of the earth. Coupled with a solid foundation, it was the strongest defense. There was no need for metal materials at all. On the contrary, if metal materials were used, the project would be bigger in the time and consumables would increase. Moreover, the effect would only be slightly stronger. At that time, the main danger came from the surface, not the underground. There was no special defense. Dean thought. He quickly stood up and pushed aside the messy books and papers scattered all over the ground, revealing the concrete floor that looked like it had shed its skin. There were no tiles on it, obviously worried that the tiles would lock into moisture on the ground and cause the shelter to be damp. Seeing the cracked and fluffy concrete ground, Dean didn't hesitate to quickly dig it with his hands. His fingernails clasped into the concrete. With the strength of his fingers, he felt like piercing into the soil. Soon, he dug out a handful of soil. Seeing that there was hope, his heart was happy. He changed his position and went to the corner of the room where there was a ventilation duct. It meant that this place was the closest to the outside. Very quickly, he dug a deep hole in the ground. He couldn't help but recall his life in prison. There was a trace of a smile in his heart. It seemed that he was destined to dig tunnels. However, the situation was undoubtedly much better than in prison. In prison, he had to hide the sound of digging and the soil dug out. But here, he could dig to his heart's content. As he dug more than a meter-deep hole, he suddenly thought of Aisha, who was outside the door. Once he climbed out of the passage, she would also leave here. He had to keep her here. If he wanted to keep her, he needed to close the door of the ruins. But there was no valve inside the ruins door. It was impossible to open and close the valve outside the ruins door. As for the mechanism on the console, he didn't dare to touch it so as not to open the door by mistake. I'll keep her here. After digging out, I'll go to the outside of the ruins to see if there's a valve to close the door. Dean immediately made up his mind. Judging from the tragic scene in the ruins, he felt that there was a high possibility that the valve was outside the ruins door. Otherwise, the people in the control room wouldn't starve to death here. He climbed out of the hole and picked up the chair that had fallen to the side. He placed it half a meter in front of Aisha's finger. Then he put the ice-crystallized flesh from his left arm on the back of the chair. It was not much different from the height of her finger. Aisha bared her fangs and growled as he moved her around. Dean glanced at her. He took out a dagger and cut his wrist. The blood flowed down the back of the chair. He stopped when half of the chair was dyed red. He quickly strangled the wound and controlled the blood flow to stop the bleeding. When he released the blood, Aisha's low growl suddenly turned into a fierce roar. At the same time, heavy breathing came out of her nose. Seeing that it was effective, Dean's heart was a little relieved. He turned back to the hole and continued to dig. His digging speed was very fast. After all, his physique was not comparable to the ordinary people of the old era who were trapped here. After a few minutes, he had dug 3 or 4 meters deep. He felt that the height of the foundation should be enough. He turned to the wall next to him. As he expected, when he dug to the ground under the metal wall, all he touched was soil. It was easy to dig through. Dean dug along the metal wall and found that the thickness of the metal wall was half a meter long. He couldn't help but be secretly speechless. With such thickness, even if it was bombarded by a missile, it may not be able to destroy the ruins. Soon, after digging through the metal wall, he immediately dug up. After digging a few meters, he suddenly found that it was still soil. He could only continue to dig up. More than 10 minutes later, he dug up a gap from the other side of the metal wall. When he climbed out of the gap, he suddenly found that he had come to the ground. He could vaguely see some wandering corpses around. In the 2 days that he was locked in the small room of the ruins, the gathered corpse tide still did not completely spread, wandering here sporadically. Dean exhaled and slid down the dug passage. The whole passage was like a U-shape. Outside the metal wall of the ruins, there was soil up to a depth of more than 10 meters, so it was not so much a U-shape, but a reverse J-shape. After sliding into the bottom of the passage, Dean quickly climbed back to the room. Seeing that Aisha was still screaming outside the door, he was relieved. He turned to pick up the dagger and other things left on the ground. He took out the corpse powder and smeared it on his body again. After smearing the powder, he took a little rest and recovered some physical strength. He quickly climbed out of the dug passage and climbed to the ground outside. After coming to the ground, he looked around and found a scattered boulder. He carried it to the entrance of the passage to prevent the corpses from accidentally falling in and climbed into the control room. After doing this, he found the right direction and quickly came to the slow passage on the other side of the ruins. He saw that there were still wandering corpses inside, but the number was much less than before. He clenched the dagger and walked into the passage. Along the way, some corpses saw him and immediately avoided him. They seemed to be disgusted with his smell. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and went straight to the passage. Suddenly, he saw that in the corridor of the passage deep in the slope, there was a strange corpse lying on the ground. The body was like a lizard, the tongue was very long, but the face was human, but the cheeks were covered with scales, which was extremely weird. With the mouth cracked to the ear root and the mouth full of sharp teeth, it was extremely ferocious. When Dean appeared, the strange walking dead suddenly turned to look at him. Dean's face changed slightly. In his weak state of the moment, it was too difficult to deal with such a strange corpse, and he was worried that the sound of fighting would attract Aisha. She was completely unaffected by the corpse powder. With her current state of complete corpse, it was estimated that she could easily tear himself apart. The lizard-like, strange walking dead stared at him with a pair of amber eyes, and the cheeks under the cracked mouth were slightly bulging, as if it was sensing something. After a while, it slowly crawled to the side, swallowed the forked tongue, and growled to Dean as a demonstration. Dean looked slightly stunned and quickly realized that this strange corpse mostly regarded himself as other high-level corpses. After all, the corpse powder was mixed with the smell of different high-level corpses. And it could also be seen from its behavior that if it recognized himself, it would probably rush up immediately and would not have such a reaction. However, from this point, it could also be seen that the corpses did not seem to be completely unconscious creatures. When they faced the same kind, they would still have some different reactions. Dean took a deep look at it and slowly walked around from the other side of the passage. He was always alert for its attack. The lizard-like corpse did not rush up, but confronted Dean and growled from time to time. Dean quickly moved to the outside of the ruins. He paid attention to the lizard-like corpse and looked into the ruins. From here, he could see the control room door in the depths of the ruins. Aisha threw herself there and made a low roar. Obviously, the smell of blood flowing on the chair stimulated her more than the stimulation of his real body appearing here at the moment. Seeing that she was not attracted, Dean was relieved and immediately looked around the gate of the ruins. After scanning a few times, he still did not see any device or hidden valve mechanism, only the iris scanning instrument. Could it be that the opening and closing were controlled by this mechanism? Such an idea flashed in his mind. He tentatively stepped forward to open the iris scanning instrument and took the button inside. A red light suddenly shot out of the instrument and swept through his eyes. Soon, the electronic synthesis voice he had heard before sounded from it. The scan is completed. The identity is confirmed. Do you want to close the shelter? Dean was stunned. He didn't expect it to be like this. He immediately said in English, yes. Boom. As soon as he finished answering, there was a slight tremor at the gate of the ruins. Soon the sound became louder and louder. The metal gates, which had previously retracted to both sides of the gate of the ruins, were pushed out again. The ground trembled slightly in the push, and the huge movement immediately attracted the attention of the wandering corpses in the passage behind Dean, and they immediately rushed here. Dean looked into the ruins and saw that Aisha had turned her head and noticed him. At the same time, her palm seemed to be struggling to pull out of the small door of the control room. Damn it! Dean was a little anxious. Close it. After struggling for a moment, Aisha pulled out her arms stuck in the window, roared, and rushed toward here. Her speed was as fast as lightning, like a thunder leopard. Dean's pupils shrank. Bang! The gate of the ruins closed with a bang. At the same time, Dean felt that the gate shook slightly, and a little dust fell off the door. Seeing this scene, Dean was shocked. Is this her current strength? Roar! Roar! At this time, the corpses that came from the passage behind Dean also fell on the giant gate of the ruins, making a burst of wailing roar. Dean immediately withdrew from the corpses. Although there was hidden corpse powder, if the distance was too close, there was still a risk of exposure. He closed the metal box on the ruins and slowly pulled back, ready to leave the passage. But it didn't take long for him to feel that there was trouble. The previous strange corpses were also attracted by the sound and rushed here. The distance between them was only about 3 or 4 meters. Such a distance. For the perception of high-grade corpses, it was a little too close. Moreover, Dean saw that there seemed to be some fierce light in its eyes. Chapter 598. Hearing this voice, Dean was shocked. Is there someone? Is it the Dragon Guard of the Dragon Clan? At this time, the undeads in the cave also seemed to notice the voice. They turned their heads and looked toward the exit of the passage, and then slowly swayed their bodies and roared as they wandered over. Lower your voice. At this time, a younger and lighter voice outside the slope passage blamed. If there is a monster lurking in this cave, you will alert the snake with such a loud voice. You don't understand this. The previous rough male voice chuckled. I originally wanted to alert the snake. There was a corpse tied here. Do you think there are monsters here who can survive? And you see the messy footprints here. So dense, there must be a lot of undeads left in this cave. When they hear my voice, they should be let out. If there are no undeads, it means that there are monsters living in it. If there are undeads, we will solve it. Yes. Another woman's voice agreed. It's dark inside. It's not good for us to fight inside. It's much easier to lead them outside. Another more stiff male voice said, there's movement inside. Pay attention. If you meet a high-level undeads, don't be bitten. Hearing the communication of several people above, Dean immediately guessed that they should be the dragon guards sent by the fortress. Thinking of the fortress, he thought of Hathaway, and his eyes could not help but reveal a cold, killing intent. At this time, the undeads in the passage all walked toward the slow passage while several people were talking. The closer the sound was, the faster the speed of the undeads was. When they came to the slow passage, some undeads had already roared. The lizard-like undeads who had previously confronted Dean turned his head when he heard the voices of several people and climbed very fast to the slow passage. In a blink of an eye, most of the undeads in the passage left. Dong! Dong! Dean heard a low sound of impact. He couldn't help but look back at the door behind him. He saw that every time the sound of impact sounded, the door would fluff a little dust. I'll be back in a minute. Dean looked at the door of the ruins and whispered to Aisha inside. After that, he followed the corpses and slowly came to the slow passage. At this time, there was a fierce battle outside the slow passage. Several people fought with the lizard-like, strange walking dead. From time to time, there was a scream of horror. It seemed that the battle was extremely dangerous. Dean's eyes flickered slightly. When the sound of fighting gradually moved away from the exit, he slowly climbed to the top of the slow passage and exposed a little vision to look out. Suddenly, he saw that in the open space hundreds of meters away, 5 figures were surrounded by corpses. In the encirclement, the lizard-like walking dead and several other sickle walking dead, as well as the ape-armed walking dead, were fighting with 5 people. Dean glanced at the armors of the 5 people and found that, as he expected, they were dragon guards. He narrowed his eyes slightly and slowly tightened his grip on the dagger, waiting for an opportunity to ambush. In just a few minutes, the number of corpses surrounding the 5 people was mostly killed and injured. There were only hundreds of corpses in this group, most of which were low-level corpses. If there were no strange walking dead and a few middle-level and high-level corpses to pin down the 5 people, with their skills, it would be easy to annihilate such small corpses. Soon, one of the rough and strong men was thrown down by the strange walking dead. Fortunately, his companion rescued him in time, so he was not bitten by the strange walking dead, but the armor on his chest was scratched and a blood mark was torn. After more than 10 minutes, the battle gradually subsided. The corpses were completely annihilated, and the fierce lizard-like strange walking dead was also killed by several people, with its head cut off. Among the 5 people, one of them had his arm bitten by an ape-armed walking dead and was cut off by his companion in time. The other people were also injured in many places, and some were bitten and scratched by low-level corpses. After the battle, several people gasped and took out medicine to start treatment. Dean squinted for a moment and slowly groped out of the slow passage. Although his abdomen was hungry and empty, he still forced the blood in his body through the dragon blood technique and entered the state of bones. Whoosh! He suddenly rushed out, without any intention of lurking in the past. In the previous battle, he noticed that the only woman among the 5 people had a strong perception. If he lurked in the past, he would be noticed by them and lose the best opportunity to attack. Gaston was just about to ask Gervin about the injury of the broken arm. Suddenly, he heard the sound of the wind, and he was shocked. He turned his head and suddenly saw a ferocious figure covered with white bones rushing quickly, and his movement was extremely fast. Not good. Gaston's face changed and shouted, "There is an enemy." Several other people also reacted and immediately noticed the ferocious strange man rushing over. When they noticed, The ferocious, strange man had appeared in front of them. The distance of 100 meters was just a moment for Dean. Puff! Dean took the lead to kill the nearest rough and strong man. The rough and strong man reacted very quickly. With a roar, he raised his arms covered with light golden scales to block. The golden scales on his arms, together with his armor, formed a double defense. His magic mark was the Steel Dragon magic mark, known as the strongest magic mark among the rare magic marks. Puff! Dean's arm shook, and his attacking posture changed instantly. Along the gap between the rough and strong man's arms, he stabbed the dagger into the man's eye socket. Although the rough and strong man had scales on his face, the eyeball was still weak, and it was instantly pierced by the dagger. Under Dean's great strength, the dagger directly stabbed into the rough and strong man's brain through the eye socket. Whoosh! He quickly pulled out the dagger, as if he was picking up a leaf from the side. All of this happened in an instant, so fast that it was hard to see. While pulling out the dagger, Dean did not stop and instantly rushed to the one-armed youth next to him. Bastard! Gaston's eyes widened in anger. He roared and bounced up from the ground, rushing to Dean, ready to rescue him. At the moment when he rushed out, Dean suddenly stopped, and his body turned to the opposite direction. Bang! His shoulder hit Gaston's body. Gaston's face was full of horror, and his body flew out uncontrollably. Whoosh! Dean turned around again, and the dagger swept toward the neck of the one-armed youth who was sitting on the ground and hadn't had time to climb up. Blood bloomed like a demon lotus. The one-armed youth raised his hand to cover his throat, and his eyes widened. Disbelief, resentment, fear, and other emotions were intertwined on his face. Dean did not glance at him, and like a whirlwind, he rushed to the woman next to him. The woman was a little confused. All of this happened too fast. From Dean's appearance to killing 2 people, a total of less than 5 seconds had passed. At this moment, seeing Dean rushing toward her, she instantly broke into a cold sweat. At the same time, she calmed down and hurriedly raised her machete to block. At the same time, she retreated, pulling the distance. However, Dean's speed was extremely fast. He quickly caught up with her, and at the same time, he raised his hand and grabbed the machete that she had raised to block. Seeing such a bold move by Dean, the woman was a little surprised. She did not expect that Dean would dare to touch her machete with his bare hands. Her heart suddenly became fierce, and she waved the machete, wanting to cut off several of Dean's fingers. However, as she exerted force, she was immediately shocked to find that her machete was like being clamped by a pair of pliers and could not move at all. Whoosh! The moment he grasped the blade of the machete with his bare hands, Dean exerted all his strength to quickly approach her. The dagger suddenly pierced through her body, and at the same time, he lifted it up, cutting the organs in her abdomen, and then quickly pulled it out. He turned around and threw it at the youth on the right who was turning around and preparing to escape. The woman's face was full of horror, and she stared at Dean, who had already turned around and left. This was a big flaw, but she did not have the strength to attack again. Even raising her hand felt extremely painful. Plop! Her body fell straight to the ground. At the same time, the flying dagger was nailed to the back of the fleeing youth. Many years of archery practice had kept Dean's judgment and accuracy above a relatively high level. All of this happened too fast. From the appearance of Dean to the defeat of all 5 people, it was like watching flowers on horseback, dazzling. After Gaston climbed up from the ground, he saw that Farah had been killed. He could not help but be stunned. He held his chest and looked at the figure standing in the field with ferocious white bones. From the latter's murderous eyes, he could see that this was not an undead, but a human like them. "You, who are you?" Gaston could not help but cry out. Dean glanced at him coldly and did not answer. His figure suddenly jumped out, instantly appearing in front of Gaston like a hurricane. Gaston's face changed, and he instantly stood up and waved his sword. Facing the fierce sword, Dean's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not dodge, but suddenly raised his hand to grab it. With a clang, the palm covered in white bones grabbed Gaston's sword, but the sharpness of the sword was beyond his expectations. He only heard a faint cracking sound from his palm, and at the same time, a tearing pain came. With a low roar, he suddenly opened his mouth and rushed toward Gaston. Gaston was shocked. He wanted to pull out the sword, but the sword was held by Dean, and he could not pull it out. He hurriedly raised his other hand to hit Dean, and Dean also punched with his left hand. Gaston only felt that his fist had hit a ball of ice, and it was extremely hard ice. He instantly felt a sharp pain, as if his fist had broken. Roar! Dean opened his mouth to bite his throat. Gaston had never seen a human fight like this. He was so scared that he could not help but let go of the sword, and raised his hand to punch Dean's chin. With a bang, his fist directly hit Dean's chin, which did not dodge. Seeing Dean's head was hit back, he could not help but show a trace of joy. The next moment, a silver light suddenly flashed in his sight, and his neck seemed to be bitten by a mosquito. It was a little numb and itchy. He was startled, and raised his hand to touch it, but his sight suddenly turned black. Flop! Gaston's head fell. Dean held the tip of the sword in his hand, using the hilt to support himself, and gasped for breath. Blood slid down from the front of the hilt, dyeing the hilt red. All this ended quickly, but he had overdrawn all his physical strength. Fortunately, these 5 people were not on guard, and a lot of physical strength was consumed by the group of zombies, so his raid was so smooth. Huff! He took 2 breaths and sat down. He could see the bodies of the 5 people around him in his wide field of vision. Previously, he was in a hurry to attack, so he had no time to identify whether they were really dead, but now he had no strength to attack again. Even if someone was pretending to be dead, he could only pretend that he still had strength left, so that they did not dare to attack rashly. After resting for a moment, he got up and went to Gaston's body, which was clearly dead. He opened his backpack and immediately saw the food and water he wanted to see. He immediately unscrewed the bottle, tore the food packaging, and swallowed. While eating, his eyes were constantly paying attention to the movements around him. Beware of unknown sneak attacks. After eating, he felt that the burning hunger in his stomach suddenly faded, and his stomach felt full, as if his body had regained strength. Chapter 599. Dean arrived in front of the youth who was nailed to death by the dagger. He was about to make a move when the youth's body suddenly turned over and quickly pulled out a knight's sword from his arms. He turned around and stabbed towards Dean's chest. Dean was slightly surprised. Fortunately, he was prepared. The sword in his hand was raised reflexively, blocking the sword. He quickly lifted his foot to kick the young man's shoulder, and at the same time forced out the semi-evolved state again. Seeing that the sneak attack failed, the young man turned and ran away with an ugly face. Dean immediately dropped the backpack in his hand and quickly chased after him. In his current state, his speed was close to that of the pioneers, so he easily caught up with the young man. He quickly waved his sword, and the young man was cut down again. Dean slowly retracted the semi-evolved state, gasped, and dragged the young man's body back. He turned his head and glanced around. The smell of blood here should attract the high-level undeads wandering nearby again. He didn't continue to stay. He came to the passage not far away, moved the stones, and then carried the bodies of the 5 people here. One by one, he transported the bodies to the small room of the control panel below the passage. In an instant, the small room was filled with a strong smell of blood. Roar! Outside the small room, a figure rushed in and hit the door fiercely, shaking the door slightly. At the same time, a roar sounded. It was Aisha, who had been at the entrance of the ruins. Dean saw that she was attracted, glanced at her, then turned and crawled along the passage to the place where the 5 people fought fiercely. He cleaned up some of the traces on the ground, especially the footprints and traces of the journey to the entrance of the passage. After doing this, he moved the boulder to the entrance of the cave again and returned to the small room of the control panel. After returning to the room, Dean sealed the passage under the metal wall with mud again. In this way, even if someone above noticed the cave covered by the stones, they would only see a deep well passage when looking inside, and would not notice the small room of the control panel connected to the passage on this side. Of course, if he met someone with strong perception, It would be useless. He sat on the side of a pile of soil and leaned against the soft soil. He took out some food and water from his backpack and ate them. He felt that his physical strength had recovered a little. He immediately got up and went to the small room where Aisha was roaring nonstop. He looked at her beautiful and ferocious face. He slowly clenched his fingers and whispered, "Bear with it. Wait until we return to the giant wall. There will be a way to restore you to your original appearance." Roar. Aisha hissed and roared. Dean stared at her and slowly turned around. Looking at the 5 corpses on the ground, the trace of softness in the depths of his eyes immediately dissipated, leaving only dark coldness. He took the risk to kill these 5 people, not only for their supplies, but more importantly, to get their bodies. In order to make Aisha stop attacking him through conditioned reflex training, the most important thing in the training process was to satisfy her bloodlust. It was like training a police dog. If there were no bones, or simulated bones, it would be difficult to achieve the training effect. After all the premises of conditioned reflex were based on instinct. Although it was a bit strange and sad to think that she would be trained in the same way he trained dogs and horses. But this was the only way he could think of at the moment. His goal was to keep her by his side forever and one day bring her back to the giant wall. He believed that there might be some confidential information about the undead in a monster research institute in the inner wall. Although he didn't have much hope to make Aisha's consciousness return, but more or less, there was always a glimmer of hope. As long as there was a little possibility, it was worth trying. He slowly squatted down and picked up the body of the youth who was similar to him. He helped him to stand on the ground. In order to have an effect, he deliberately kept their corpses intact. Roar. Seeing the smell of blood, Aisha roared even more crazily. She tried to reach out. Dean looked at her appearance. There was some sadness in his heart. He knew that his behavior was a blasphemy for her, but it was more difficult for him to stop such behavior. "I'm sorry." Dean bowed slightly. "I'll let you eat better when we return to the giant wall. Now, I'm sorry." He took a deep breath and looked at Aisha again after he finished talking. In the Dragon Fortress, in a simple and magnificent hall, a delicate figure dressed in a luxurious robe sat on a throne, looking down at the few dragon guards who were half kneeling on the bright red carpet below the steps. The middle-aged man in the lead had a respectful expression on his face, his hands raised high, and in his hands was a huge blood-red sword. The blade of the sword seemed to be flowing with fresh blood, and the sinister hilt of the sword was engraved with the appearance of a skull. Its eye sockets seemed to be flickering with green light. "Your Highness, we only found this. We didn't see any trace of Her Highness Aisha." The middle-aged man respectfully replied. Haley on the throne squinted her eyes and stared at the blood-red sword. She would never mistake this familiar sword. It was her sister's inseparable magic weapon, Blood Baron. She had heard how difficult the forging process of this sword was since she was a child. She didn't expect that the sword would fall into her hands today. She couldn't help but smile. Compared with the sword, she was happier about the news it conveyed. It had been 2 days. The sword was still in the wilderness. Her sister hadn't retrieved it. She knew that the magic weapon and its master could sense each other within a certain range. Aisha hadn't found the sword in 2 days. It could only mean that she was gone. My poor sister. She smiled at her heart, but her expression was very calm. She said to the people under the stairs, "You have done a meritorious deed by retrieving my sister's magic weapon. From now on, you will be freed from the status of dragon slaves. You will officially become a member of the Dragon Clan. You can return to your family and never step into the wasteland again." When the middle-aged man and his team members heard this, they could not help but be overjoyed and repeatedly bowed in thanks. "Thank you, Your Highness Saintess. You are truly a benevolent saintess. We will pledge our lives to the Dragon Clan and be loyal to you." Haley slightly nodded. "Go." "Yes." They immediately got up and turned to leave. Chapter 600. From this chapter onwards, the content will be on the right track. I will try to write in a way that I feel is better. Earth was still orbiting according to the orbit of the stars. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed. The dark snow dormant inside and outside the giant wall gradually melted, and the temperature on the surface slowly rose. The rainy season was approaching. This was not good news for everyone. Compared to the solidified snow, people hated the all-pervasive rain even more. "Captain, why did we come to this area?" Sereth looked worriedly at the broken corpses all around him and said to the captain, "I heard from a brother of Team 3 that in the past 2 months, most of the hunting teams in the Red Desolate Zone 2 have disappeared, and none of them have survived. There are already rumors that there are terrifying monsters lurking here. If we encounter them, we'll probably be in trouble." Sereth nodded. Saunier patted him on the shoulder and smiled. "Buddy, these are all rumors. This place has been baptized by the corpse tide, so how can there be any high-level monsters left? The corpse king that gathered the corpse tide has long been killed, and its weapons have fallen into Her Highness Hathaway's hands. God bless us. I hope we're fine." Sereth's worry did not disappear as he prayed. Langdon smiled. "This is the wasteland, the forbidden land of God. Even if there's a God, he can't protect you." Sereth glared at her. "Nonsense. This world was created by God. Don't blaspheme God anywhere in the world." Langdon was unhappy when she heard this. "Even if there's a God, he's an evil God." "Shut up," Saunier suddenly said. The two ignored him and continued to argue. Saunier looked ahead and said in a deep voice, "Who are you?" A thin figure stood there. He was relatively slender but bony, with deep eye sockets. He was wearing tattered armor with a faint engraving of the dragon emblem. At this moment, he was staring straight at the 5 of them. In his deep eye sockets were a pair of pitch-black eyes without the slightest emotion, making Saunier extremely uncomfortable and feel a great threat. Langdon and Sereth immediately sensed the silent appearance of this figure and were shocked, especially Langdon. She had the ability to detect heat sources. Although she was arguing with Sereth, she was constantly observing the surroundings and did not notice when this person had approached and appeared directly in front of them. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was a ghost. The ghostly figure did not reply. He looked at them indifferently with his dark eyes, and then his figure suddenly flickered and disappeared into thin air. Seeing the latter disappear, Sereth was bewildered. Was an illusion just now? The next moment, he heard Captain Saunier shout, "Be careful." Just as he reacted, he suddenly saw the ghostly figure that had disappeared earlier appear directly in front of him, as if it had teleported. This change was beyond his expectations. Just as he was about to block, he felt a pain in his abdomen, and his body was sent flying. After sending one person flying, the ghostly figure dashed forward like a wolf in a flock of sheep. In the blink of an eye, Langdon, who was proficient in perception, was knocked down. A cold light slashed across Langdon's snow-white neck. The girl's eyes widened as she fell to the ground unwillingly. "No!" Saunier's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. With a roar, he drew his sword and rushed out. His sword was light, sharp, and fast. However, after exchanging blows several times, the sword was unable to even touch the ghostly figure. Soon, when their palms crossed, Saunier's sword mysteriously disappeared and fell into the hand of the ghostly figure. The next moment, with a flash of light, Saunier's body stiffened. He raised his hand to cover the blade in his chest. For the first time, he truly felt the sharpness of the sword. After he fell, the ghostly figure pulled out the sword and flicked its finger. The sharp sword flew out and stabbed into the ground, trembling nonstop. The ghostly figure bent down to pick up the corpses, turned around, and ran away quickly. The way it ran was like a gorilla in the forest. Soon, the ghostly figure stopped in front of a boulder. It moved the boulder away and threw the 3 corpses into the passage. Then it slid down the passage and climbed out from the other side. It returned to the control room, where it had been living for 2 months. The small room was rather messy. Bones were scattered all over the floor, all of which had been gnawed and stained with blood. Most of the bones were still stained with blood and flesh. Other than that, the stink of feces and urine drifted over from the corner of the wall. Above the stink of filth, the treasures of human civilization on the bookshelves were covered, but it was still difficult to cover the disgusting stench. Dean threw the 3 corpses into the small room buried deep in the ground. He lay down and rested. He didn't care about the stench in the air. While resting, he looked at the beautiful figure standing quietly a few meters in front of him. Compared to the bloody, chaotic, and filthy environment around her, she was like a green lotus. As long as he gazed at her, even in such an environment, Dean didn't feel the slightest bit tired. The surrounding bones were like flowers in full bloom, and each one was floating with a pleasant fragrance. His cheekbones were so thin that his cheekbones were prominent. There was a smile on his cheekbones. "When the last instruction training is over, we can go back," he said softly to her. Aisha stood quietly, expressionless. She didn't roar or respond. She didn't even blink her eyelids. She stood in front of Dean like a wooden sculpture. Dean had long been accustomed to her state. He smiled and waited for his physical strength to recover a little. He climbed up from the ground, picked up the woman's corpse, and handed it to her. The strong smell of blood drifted out from Langdon's snow-white neck. It was like a tempting devil's claw, constantly stimulating Aisha's senses. Her pure black eyes slightly shrank, her snow-white nose slightly twitched, and the corner of her mouth slightly trembled. It seemed that she was trying to endure and was extremely eager. Dean silently counted the time in his heart. Soon, 5 minutes had passed. At this time, Aisha's reaction was much stronger. Her originally vertical hands trembled slightly, and her neck slightly twisted. Her eyes were fixed on the snow-white neck in front of her. Dean saw that she was about to reach her limit, so he immediately snapped his fingers. Hearing the snapping sound, Aisha instantly looked like she had been freed from a cage. She showed an extremely ferocious and ugly expression. Her originally beautiful face was instantly torn apart. She completely disregarded her image and picked up the food in front of her. She bit, gnawed, and swallowed like a hungry traveler who had fainted and wolfed down a piece of black bread. This twisted and bloody scene was staged in front of Dean. It seemed that because she was too excited, Aisha bit so hard that blood spurted out from Langdon's snow-white neck and splashed on Dean's face. However, Dean just quietly stared at the crazy figure in front of him as if he didn't feel anything. After Langdon's neck was completely bitten off, Dean snapped his fingers again. The crazy Aisha immediately froze, stopped, and then let go of her hand. Langdon's body, which she was holding in her arms, fell straight to the ground. His head, which still had a sliver of blood on it, immediately broke off in the fall. The head fell off and rolled to the side of the skeleton's pelvis. Her beautiful eyes were still wide open. Dean looked at Aisha, who had regained her calmness. His eyes showed a gentle color. He took out a clean silk handkerchief from his arms and gently wiped Aisha's blood-stained lips. As for where this silk handkerchief came from, he couldn't remember clearly. It seemed to be from a woman in a squad he had killed a few days ago. While Dean was wiping, Aisha was expressionless. She was motionless and motionless. After wiping her lips, Dean looked at her and smiled. Then he stretched out his hand to her, like a gentleman at a ball inviting a noble lady. Aisha was silent for a moment when she saw his raised hand. Her palm was slightly raised, a little stiff, but she handed it to Dean as if she was returning a courtesy. Dean was very satisfied. He pinched her fingertips and held them up gracefully. Then he used the other end of the silk handkerchief to gently wipe her white and tender fingers. One by one, he wiped all the blood stains in the gaps between her fingers. He was like a rich man wiping his most beloved jewelry. Soon, he finished wiping and put down her palm in the same elegant posture. He smiled and asked, "You've been standing for so long. Are you tired?" Aisha was expressionless and motionless. Dean showed a happy smile as if he had gotten the answer. He said, "Tired? Let's sit down and have a rest, okay?" Aisha was still standing still. Dean listened attentively. Soon his eyebrows moved, and he said with a smile, "Then let's have a rest." As he spoke, he supported her body and brought her to a chair at the side. He took out 2 metal rods from his belt and lightly tapped them twice, making a ding-ding sound. Aisha slowly sat on the chair, but her back was still straight. Dean smiled and sat on the ground next to the chair. He rested his head on her lap and gently stroked her calf. He said softly, "We will go back soon. At that time, I will help you find a way to restore your consciousness. After all, didn't they say that even God exists? In that case, why can't there be a way to bring the dead back to life?" "Well, I know that you and I have the same idea. You have a good rest." "I'm a little tired." A few days later, in the Dragon Fortress, Jacques bowed his head and looked at Haley, who was sitting on the majestic throne above the steps. He said, "Your Royal Highness, the squads in the second area of the Red Wasteland have frequently disappeared. All of them were wiped out. It's a bit unreasonable to say that such a situation is normal. According to our past experience, even if we encountered a high-level monster, there would be some news. It's unlikely that the whole team would be wiped out. I hope that your Royal Highness can investigate this." Haley said in a condescending tone, "What do you think is the situation?" Jacques secretly glanced at her. He was hesitant, but he still said his thoughts. "Your Royal Highness, you said that Her Royal Highness Aisha died together with the Corpse King. However, in my opinion, although the Corpse King was guarded by 2 giant corpses and was very terrible, it shouldn't be Her Royal Highness Aisha's opponent. Perhaps there are changes in the second area of the Red Wasteland that we don't know about." Haley narrowed her eyes. "So, you think my sister is not dead?" Jacques shook his head. "That's not what I mean. Her Royal Highness Aisha's Blood Baron is inseparable from her. If the sword is dead, the sword is dead. I just think that if Her Royal Highness Aisha is dead, it means that the Corpse King in the second area of the Red Wasteland is stronger than we thought. Perhaps there are 3 giant corpses guarding the Corpse King. If that's the case, we may have missed one. I think that we should send an elite team to investigate so as to avoid unnecessary sacrifice of ordinary dragon guards." Haley nodded slightly. "Interesting. Let's do that. You will personally lead the team to investigate this matter." Jacques breathed a sigh of relief and quickly accepted the order. After Jacques left the hall, a person immediately flashed out from the dark side of the hall and said to Haley, "Your Royal Highness, we can't let Jacques go to the second area of the Red Wasteland. Her perception ability is one of the best among the 8 generals. If she really finds something, won't," Haley said indifferently. "The best way to solve suspicion is to let her find the answer herself. Do you think I don't know that the purpose of her going to the Red Wasteland is to find out the cause of my sister's death? Humph, she is too self-righteous. Considering the situation of the corpse tide at that time, my sister's body would not be left after her death. Don't forget, she is the purest person in our dragon clan. Her blood has a fatal attraction to monsters." "I see." The shadow bowed his head and said respectfully, "Your Royal Highness is thoughtful." In the vast and chaotic wasteland, 2 figures walked on foot. From the figure, it was a man and a woman. The man was carrying a small backpack, and the woman was empty-handed. She followed the man closely like a ghost. In the sky filled with dark clouds, there was a faint sound of thunder. It seemed that a heavy rain was coming. Dean was a little tired, so he stopped to take a rest. He heard the sound of thunder above his head. He looked up and suddenly thought of something. He looked around and soon found a bush. He walked over, found a few big leaves, and weaved them into a straw umbrella. Not long after he was done, heavy rain began to fall, and the raindrops quickly soaked the ground. He held the straw umbrella over Haley's head. As the breeze blew, he looked at Haley and smiled. Haley was expressionless. Her pure black eyes quietly looked at the distance in front of her, as if she was watching another world. Dean smiled and looked up at the curtain of rain. He said to Haley beside him, "The sky is so far away from us. Why does its rain fall on the ground?" Haley was silent and did not answer. Chapter 601. The content of this book is about to be on the right track, which is what I'm looking forward to. Of course, it's what everyone is looking forward to. However, the content that happens later might not be what everyone is looking forward to or likes. Perhaps some of it will challenge some people's worldview and make them unable to look at it directly. However, this is what this book looks like. This book is definitely not a good book. Whether it's from a commercial or a positive point of view, Old Goot doesn't want to show off under the banner of evil energy being the truth. Speaking up to this point, there are two reasons for writing this book. First, it's to draw a satisfactory, full stop to his apocalyptic literary path. Second, it's also because he has some ideas that he wants to find the answers to while writing this book. Therefore, no matter what happens, this book will not be affected or changed for any reason. If some negative ideas or extreme situations in this book make you unable to persevere, then we'll meet again in the next book next year. A gentleman should not say evil words when saying goodbye. Finally, I hope that all my fans will be happy forever. Chapter 602. Aisha was indifferent and silent. Dean smiled and reached out to hold her slender hand. Although it was cold, he felt a familiar warmth. He immediately took her hand and slowly walked forward, crossing the puddles of water on the road. In the heavy rain, the two walked side by side, hand in hand. Only Dean's voice could be heard in the rain. The dilapidated buildings on both sides of the road were like silent haunted houses. The collapsed holes were like deep eye sockets, staring blankly at the two people who passed by. Under the washing of the heavy rain, the dilapidated walls were washed away and polished to become smoother. The disastrous rain came and went quickly. In the blink of an eye, the rain stopped. Only 1 or 2 drops of rain occasionally fell on the muddy puddles on the road, causing ripples to appear. The puddles reflected the dusky sky, causing the ripples to distort. Dean saw that the rain had stopped, so he put away the umbrella. Suddenly, he felt a bit cold on his shoulder. He turned around and saw that his left shoulder was wet from the rain. He put away the straw umbrella and grabbed the clothes on his shoulder. He wrung out the rain and continued to walk forward with Aisha. When he reached the crossroads of the street, he stopped and looked at the southeast. He was silent for a moment and turned to Aisha. Your weapon was not found in the tide of corpses. It should have been recovered by the Dragon Clan. Don't worry. When we return to the giant wall, everything we have lost will return to our hands. I promise you. Aisha looked at him with her pure black eyes. It seemed that she was saying that she believed in him. Dean thought so. He smiled and took her in the other direction, a black that was crawling on the towering giant wall. It looked like a mosquito crawling on the wall. Sergei held the rope with both hands and quickly slid down. He secretly took a deep breath. Every time he climbed over the giant wall, he felt particularly nervous and scared. This height was beyond his limit. Once he fell, he would be smashed to pieces. Therefore, he would carefully check the rope and observe the direction of the wind to avoid encountering strong winds. Bang! When he was 7 or 8 meters above the ground, he loosened his grip and jumped off the rope. When his feet touched the ground, he could feel the vibration coming from the soles of his feet. Although it was a little painful, the feeling of stepping on the ground was incomparably firm. He let out a light breath and immediately turned around and strode away. Not long after, he arrived at a dilapidated ruin covered by tall grass. He circled to a corner of the ruins and pushed aside a cluster of lush green grass, revealing a hole that led to the rubble of the ruins. He walked in and came to the basement of the ruined building. There was a dusty car parked there. He lay down and climbed under the metal. There was a staircase passage. His body went down the stairs, took out a match, and lit the oil lamp on the wall. He slowly stood up and walked down the winding stairs. Soon, he came to the end of the passage, where there was a black iron door. He took out the key and opened the door. There was an extremely spacious basement. It was more like an underground cave than a basement. There were soil and rock walls inlaid with oil lamps. In addition, the wide cave was filled with objects. They weren't hunting equipment, but metal raw materials, rubber, and other different kinds of materials. Sergei glanced at the familiar cave. He didn't see anything unusual. He took off the huge bag from his back and put it aside. There was enough food and water for him to continue living here for a while. He came to the side of a simple bed that was laid on a metal board and lay down. He leaned against the bed and crossed his legs. He took out a dagger and a piece of wood beside the bed and began carving puppets out of boredom as usual. This was his idea to relieve boredom when he saw the carvings in Dean's room. After trying it out, he learned very quickly. After 2 attempts, he was able to carve things with ease. The carvings were vivid and lifelike. However, the puppets he carved were different from others. He only carved women. Moreover, they were naked women, because it was his biggest hobby. The sharp dagger slid across the wood. Between the alternating shaving and shaving techniques, the outline of a perfectly round breast appeared. He was very satisfied and leaned in to kiss it. He felt as if he was kissing a real beauty's breast. He couldn't help but close his eyes in comfort. Soon he loosened his lips and revealed a hearty smile. "You are my 108th woman. I will call you 108th. Do you understand?" Of course, Marionette couldn't speak, but Sergei always had a way with women. After he finished speaking, the dagger in his hand quickly moved and traced between Marionette's lips. Soon, the corner of Marionette's mouth outlined a trace of an upward arc, seemingly shy, but also happy. Sergei couldn't help but laugh. Halfway through his laughter, he was suddenly startled. He couldn't help but raise his head to look up, and his expression became serious. He straightened his body and flipped himself up from the metal plate. He came to a wall of the cave and bent his ear to listen. Soon, his expression changed, and he was bewildered. Footsteps? And there are 2 people? Who could it be? Did he come back? Impossible. He has always been a loner. It can't be Glenn and the others. After eliminating the possibility of it being an ally, his expression slowly became gloomy. He turned around and quickly went to the side of the metal plate. He put down the puppet and dagger, grabbed the weapon and combat bag next to him, and quietly crawled out of the cave. He came to the deep grass outside, half squatting by the grass, and coldly looked towards the source of the footsteps. Gradually, 2 figures slowly walked over from a distance. Due to the waist-high grass around him, he could only see the upper body of the intruder. When he saw the 2 black dots, his eyes flashed with killing intent. He gripped his weapon tightly, and at the same time, he silently estimated the best distance for a sneak attack. He slowly saw the faces of the people as they gradually approached. He couldn't help but widen his eyes. He rubbed his eyes again. This time he could see more clearly. "Master!" Sergei couldn't help but stand up. He was pleasantly surprised to see Dean. He raised his hand and waved at him. Dean's face didn't show any surprise when he saw Sergei's shaved head. He was holding Aisha's hand as he walked forward. Sergei saw that Dudian was walking slowly, so he took the initiative to run towards him. He was surprised when he saw Dudian's appearance. He hadn't seen Dudian for 2 or 3 months. In his mind, Dudian was still a teenager. At this moment, there were strands of white hair. The rest of the black hair had faded as if it was smeared with frost. He looked a bit lethargic. Sergei couldn't believe it. "Young master," Udine asked, "what?" Sergei's heart shrank as he saw Dudian's calm eyes. There was a strange feeling in his heart. He felt that Dudian was a bit strange. It seemed that Dudian was very different from the youth in his memory. However, there was one thing that didn't change. It was hard to guess Dudian's thoughts and thoughts from Dudian's eyes. "No, nothing." Sergei shook his head. Suddenly, he felt the hairs on his body stand up. It seemed that an extremely evil gaze was staring at him. He couldn't help but shrink his pores. He looked towards the source of the chill. He saw a slim figure behind Dean. However, he subconsciously took a step back when he saw the figure. It was as if he had met a natural enemy. There was an uncontrollable shiver that spread throughout his body. Dean noticed Sergei's frightened appearance. He looked at Aisha and saw her gloomy expression. It seemed that she was enduring. He couldn't help but frown. It seemed that he needed to strengthen the training. "This is my friend. You don't have to worry," Dean said, "but she has a bad temper. It's best not to get close to her. Don't let her see red objects." Sergei heard Dudian's words and couldn't help but glance at the beautiful girl. Her appearance had subverted his previous definition of a beauty. However, he had never seen such a flawless face before. He couldn't think of any blasphemy. He just wanted to stay away from her. "Master, your friend is my friend." Sergei reluctantly squeezed out a smile as he reached out to shake Dean's hand. Dean raised his hand and pressed Sergei's palm. "Have you forgotten what I just said?" Sergei was startled. "I didn't forget. I was afraid that it would be impolite." Dean asked, "Have you prepared the materials?" Sergei immediately said as he saw Dean go straight to the business, "I've prepared everything. I'll take you to see." Dean nodded. Sergei turned around and quickly returned to the ruins. He said, "Master, I've built the stronghold that you asked me to build. If there's anything you're not satisfied with, I'll change it." Dean and Sarah followed behind him. Dean saw the underground cave that Sergei had built after entering the ruins. He nodded in satisfaction. Sergei was rough on the surface, but his heart was delicate. He needed such a person to do things for him. "Good." Dean glanced at the cave. "Very good." Sergei grinned as he heard Dean's praise. "This is based on the methods I saw in different strongholds of other consortia when I was a hunter. I just copied them. Being able to copy is also a skill," Dudian said. Sergei scratched his head. Dean came to the front of the materials and glanced at them. He knew that the number of materials was correct. He looked at Sergei. "You have worked hard these days. Go back to your residence and rest. Tell Glenn and Nicholas that I'm going back. Tell them to prepare the troops and money." Sergei was surprised. "Master, what are you going to do?" "Go to war." Dean's voice was incomparably calm. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed since the rainy season began. Dean was sitting under a broken stone. The stone was like an umbrella to block the rain. He looked at the sky and the earth that was covered by the curtain of rain. He was silent for a moment. He looked at Aisha, who was sitting next to him. "Do you remember the first time we met in such weather?" Aisha was silent. Dudian tilted his head and looked at the towering wall on the left. He narrowed his eyes. "If the day I woke up is my birthday, then I should be 18 years old by now." Aisha was still silent. Dean continued, "In the blink of an eye, I've been in this world for 10 years. 10 years. I only have 8 years of memories from before. Of these 8 years of memories, I can only remember about 5 years. Tell me, do I belong to this world or that world?" There was no response. Dean looked into the distance. There was a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. After a moment, he slowly retracted his eyes. "The sky is clear." The rain stopped. The sun penetrated through the turbid clouds and shined on the ground. The air was full of rotten smell. There was a fresh smell. Dean slowly got up and gently rubbed his fingers to make a small sound. Aisha immediately got up and followed him like a shadow. The two returned to the cave under the ruins. Dean moved some strange parts out of the ruins and piled them up in the open space. Then he assembled them one by one. After 2 months of smelting and forging, his new invention was basically completed. This time, the main purpose of the new invention was not to kill the enemy, but to protect himself. And under the current conditions, the only new divine art he could think of and create was only one, and that was the weapon of lightning. A fortress full of thunder and lightning, and a set of armor full of high-voltage direct current. This was his new magic. Even if the enemy was 10 times or 100 times stronger than the Pioneer, he believed that he couldn't be faster than the speed of the electric current. Anyone who attacked him would be killed by him. As for other technological items, the most lethal ones were thermal weapons. But whether it was missiles or other weapons of mass destruction, first of all, it was too difficult to make them. Secondly, even if they were made, the effect on the Pioneer was not strong unless it was a sneak attack. However, a sneak attack could be successful. If it was a second or third time, it would be equal to a full-scale war with the inner wall. At that time, the role of missiles would be almost zero. The inner wall could easily send assassin-type pioneers to sneak into his fortress and assassinate him. Therefore, in front of so many weapons, only thunder and lightning could protect him. Even if the enemy's speed was faster than his reaction, and the assassination technique was faster than his senses, he would have an immortal body with the protection of the fortress covered in high-voltage electric currents and the armor. And this was the biggest capital of his survival. If it wasn't for the arrangement of the electric current to the inner wall, which requires too many grid lines, it would be enough to rule the whole world by electricity alone. Dean was regretful, but he was quite satisfied with self-protection. As for fighting, he had many ways. Chapter 603. A few days later, Sergei returned to the stronghold and reported to Dudian. Master, everything has been prepared. Nicholas and Glenn are waiting for you. Dudian accompanied Aisha to sit on a stone and looked at the distant sunset. He didn't look back as he heard Sergei's words. Has the news been leaked? Sergei quickly replied, No, I only told Glenn, Nicholas, and your two friends as you told me. No one else knows. Dudian nodded as he looked at the sunset. He mocked in his heart. The night was coming. Even the dazzling sun had been eroded into blood red. Was it a sign of something? He slowly got up and patted the dust on his sleeves. He held Aisha's hand and whispered, We can go home now. Aisha silently got up. Her expression was indifferent. Sergei's heart palpitated as he looked at Aisha. Every time he faced her, he had the feeling of living with a tiger. He couldn't help but want to leave as soon as possible. But he knew that the girl's position in Dudian's heart was quite high. He had never seen this cold-blooded boy be so intimate and gentle to anyone. Dudian put a few fully charged super batteries into the hunter's backpack and gave it to Sergei. He took the lead and went to the rope in front of the giant wall. He looked at Aisha. He didn't see any instructions for climbing. He reached out and hugged her waist. His other hand grabbed the rope, and his legs clamped the lower end of the rope. He climbed up with one hand. Sergei was afraid that the rope would be too heavy and break. He didn't dare to keep up. He stood on the ground and watched the figures of Dudian and Aisha gradually go to the top of the giant wall. He didn't expect that the mysterious girl would be so obedient to Dudian. The intimate relationship between the two was obvious. He was in awe of Dudian. Dudian didn't look down as he climbed to the top of the giant wall. He used the rope to jump up and landed on the giant wall. He looked at Sergei, who had just climbed up the rope. He didn't urge Sergei. He waited while looking at the mountains and the land inside the giant wall. The corner of his mouth slightly curved. After a moment, Sergei climbed up the giant wall and said, I've let young Master wait for a long time. Let's go. Dudian held Aisha in one hand as he came to the other side of the giant wall and slid down the rope. The night quietly arrived. The stars were shining brightly in the night sky. In front of a luxurious manor in a bustling town in the commercial district, carriages arrived one after another. The carriages didn't stop outside the gate like ordinary noble guests. Instead, they drove directly to a spacious open space in the manor. The people who got off the carriages wore strange masks. Under the guidance of the attendants, they entered the brightly lit castle of the manor. Unlike the quiet manor, there was a bustling sound coming from the depths of the manor. It was like a lively market during the day. Masked figures were wandering in the square. They were picking the materials they needed or the latest news from the area. In addition, there were some alchemists and potion masters who were selling their works. Hawkeye stood by the window and quietly looked at the familiar night scenery. After a moment, the door behind him was pushed open. A handsome boy who was 17 or 18 years old stepped into the room. He looked arrogant. Hawkeye, the meeting is about to begin. Have you prepared the materials that the elders asked you to prepare? Hawkeye frowned slightly. He didn't like to be disturbed, and at this moment, the person he disliked the most was doing the thing he disliked the most. His golden eyes flashed with killing intent, but he quickly hid it, including the anger in his heart. He turned and smiled. Secretary Mar, I have prepared the materials. I can hand them over to the elders at any time. The arrogant boy coldly snorted. Come to the conference room if you are ready. Don't let everyone wait for a long time. Okay, I'll be right there. Hawkeye smiled. The arrogant young man immediately turned around and left. He grabbed the door handle and casually closed it. With a bang, the door frame trembled slightly. Hawkeye's smile suddenly disappeared. He grabbed an expensive art cup next to him and slammed it against the wall, breaking it into pieces. He grabbed the materials on the bookshelf next to him and went out of the door. In the conference room, 7 figures sat on both sides of the round table. At the head of the table sat an old man with a hunched back. His face was full of wrinkles, and he looked no different from an ordinary old man on the street. On his finger was an inconspicuous dark green jade thumb ring. Only a few people knew that the price of this thumb ring alone was equivalent to 50% of the wealth of any of the 6 consortiums. The door of the conference room was pushed open. The arrogance on the boy's face had long disappeared. He humbly bowed in front of the old man and whispered, "Elder, Hawkeye is here." The old man's eyelids were still half closed. He didn't respond and just gently nodded. Soon Hawkeye also entered the room. He glanced at the boy standing behind the old man. At this moment, the boy's face no longer had any arrogance. He only took a glance before turning his head and saying to the old man, "Elder, I have prepared the information you wanted." With that said, he handed the information in his hand to the old man with both hands. The old man didn't take it. The boy deftly took it and respectfully placed it on the table in front of the old man. The old man was silent for a moment. He slowly said, "Everyone, the elders' meeting will be held in a few days. Every elder meeting is nothing more than to discuss the ranking. According to the performance of our 9th district in the past 6 months, what do you think our 9th district will be ranked after this meeting?" Hearing this, the complexion of the 6 people slightly changed. One of them with a voluptuous figure immediately said, "Elder, you can't blame us. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame the previous elder. Not only did he not do anything, he even dismissed us 6 counselors. Moreover, he even imprisoned me in the dungeon. Fortunately, Elder came and freed me. Otherwise, our 9th region would be even weaker." "Yes," another tall and sturdy man said in a low voice, "Elder, we have tried our best to develop, but after the previous elder removed the 6 counselors, he suddenly disappeared. During the period of his appointment, he didn't do anything. When our 9th region was invaded, he completely ignored it, causing us to suffer heavy losses. If it wasn't for him, our 9th region would have been able to maintain its status and even have the possibility to rise." "That's right," another person immediately added, "Elder, if it weren't for your timely arrival, our 9th district would have no one to lead us, and it would have been even more chaotic. I'm afraid that we might even be at the bottom. Although I've spent a lot of effort to nurture a lot of promising newcomers, but after all, time is limited. I believe that by the next elder meeting, we will definitely be able to restore our 9th district's ranking." The old man slightly raised his hand to stop the others who wanted to speak. He indifferently said, "I know that the previous elder has a great responsibility, but during my tenure, how are the tasks that I assigned to you all?" Hearing this, everyone was startled. They looked at each other with ugly expressions. "As counselors, I am very disappointed that you all have such neglectful performance. The chairman is also very disappointed," the old man said indifferently. Hearing the 2 words chairman, everyone's face slightly changed. A trace of awe flashed in their eyes. "This time, our ranking will definitely fall," the old man slowly said. "But considering the previous elder's bad influence, I will take full responsibility this time. However, I hope that during the next elder meeting, everyone will not make things difficult for me. If I am difficult, everyone will be difficult. Do you understand?" Everyone had different thoughts. They lowered their heads and said, "Yes." "Good." The old man's eyes slightly flashed. He glanced at everyone and ordered Hawkeye, "Pass the information to everyone. Everyone, this is the latest information about the 8th and 11th districts. Take a good look at the increase in their number of 3-star alchemists and the identity of a new 5-star potion master in the 8th district." A new 5-star potion master appeared in the 8th district. Everyone was slightly surprised. They immediately grabbed the information and looked at it. The old man slowly said, "When this meeting of the elders is over, I plan to take over the Reyes Street in the Eastern District. That's the ancestral land of the Huasheng Financial Group's Moss family. If we could take over that place, we might be able to seize the Moss family by the throat. In this way, we can also make up for the losses brought by the previous elder." At this point, a cold wind suddenly blew in from outside, causing the temperature in the room to instantly drop. Chapter 604. Hearing this, everyone was shocked and looked over. Behind the old man, there was a tall figure. When they saw this person's face, the 6 counselors on both sides of the conference table suddenly widened their eyes and said in shock, "It's you." They didn't expect to see this former elder again. Wasn't he wanted by the chairman? How dare he appear here in public? At this time, someone noticed that this former elder didn't come alone. There was a figure standing in the dark behind him, like a ghost. Judging from the figure's outline, it seemed to be a woman, just like his shadow. The old man felt as if a fierce tiger was looking down at him from above, as if the slightest abnormality would cause him to suffer a thunderous attack. He did not panic, and his expression did not change, but his shoulders suddenly moved, and a hard force burst forth from his bones. He believed that this move would not only shake off this hand, but would also be able to injure this person. After all, not just anyone could casually place a hand on his shoulder. However, as soon as this hard force rose, he felt his shoulder suddenly sink. The palm on his shoulder was like a huge mountain pressing down heavily. Not only did it cancel out all the force he had burst out, but it also directly crushed over. With a bang, the legs of the chair he sat on exploded. His body shook, and he felt a slight stuffy in his chest, as if he couldn't breathe. The old man was shocked and couldn't help turning his head to look, but he saw a handsome young man's face that was much younger than he imagined. The young man's expression was indifferent, and his black eyes seemed to be looking at the conference table in front of him, but also seemed to be looking down at him. "Who are you?" The old man suppressed the shock in his heart and said in a low voice. Hearing the old man's words, the clever young man next to him immediately scolded, "Bastard, give me your dirty hand." "Who are you? How dare you trespass here? You want to die." As soon as he said the word die, his voice became distorted. He saw that his neck was strangled, and a bald, strong man wearing a mask flashed in from outside, carrying a huge black bag on his back. He strangled the young man's throat like he was holding a chick, and said in a low voice, "Kid, try saying what you said again." The young man's throat and windpipe were pressed down. His face was flushed, and he couldn't breathe. At this moment, it was difficult for him to even make a sound, let alone speak smoothly. "Everyone, long time no see. Did you miss me?" Dean's voice was flat. There was no emotion in his voice. All 6 of them were members of the Dark Church. They had been through many battles with the Holy Church. How could they not see that the old man was under Dean's control? They were shocked. The seemingly ordinary old man had beheaded several great knights of the Holy Church. His body looked like a skeleton, but it contained terrifying power. But at the moment, he was so easily controlled by Dean. Thinking of the many possibilities that could lead to this person appearing here, everyone felt their scalps go numb. This was a person wanted by the chairman. Since this person dared to appear here, there was naturally a possibility that he could silence them. Elder, we all miss you very much." A bearded middle-aged man revealed a rather natural smile, but the stiff muscles on his face made the smile look somewhat forced. "Yes, Elder, we all miss you very much." Another strong man immediately added. The calm old man's heart once again set off a huge wave as he heard the words of the 2 men. He didn't expect that this young man was the missing elder. Moreover, he dared to appear here. "I know that everyone misses me, so I came back." Dean's expression was indifferent and natural as he said, "I heard you mention about the elders' meeting. I seem to remember that half a year ago I promised that after 6 months I would make the 9th region one of the top 5 regions. I don't know if you still remember." The old man was surprised. The 6 members of the council were also startled. They looked at each other. They naturally remembered these words, but after Dean's disappearance, they regarded these words as the latter's bragging and did not take it to heart. After all, they were used to this kind of thing. When they first took office, they promised a very high goal, and the purpose was just a means to win over people's hearts. After a long time in office, the foundation would be deep, and who would dare to mention the goal set at the beginning of taking office? Unless they didn't want to mix with the others. I always keep my word. I will personally participate in the elders' meeting." Dean calmly said. Sergei couldn't help but secretly curl his lips as he heard Dean's words. In his heart, Dean was definitely one of the most untrustworthy people. Dean was not a person who would talk about his reputation, but a person who wouldn't get up early if there was no profit. The six of them looked at Dean. After a while, the previous strong man cautiously said, "Elder, you are no longer an elder of the ninth region. The elders' meeting has always been attended by the elders. I'm afraid it doesn't matter." Dean indifferently said, "It may be so before me, but it may not be the same after me." The strong man was tongue-tied and couldn't speak. The old man was shocked as he heard Dean's words. He knew that Dean's strength was beyond that of a senior hunter. Perhaps his strength was comparable to the top few monsters in the outer wall. If Dean wanted to break into the elders' meeting, then the old man wouldn't be able to stop him. He quickly calculated in his mind, "I didn't expect you to be the previous elder. Nice to meet you." "Yeah." Dean nodded slightly. This kind of attitude seemed a bit arrogant. The old man was unhappy, but he didn't show it. He continued, "Although you have abdicated, since you are still concerned about the ninth region, you can come with me." Dean patted the old man's shoulder. This action interrupted the old man's words. "Get up and talk to me." The old man's face turned ugly. He suppressed his anger. "I'm old, so it's not rude for me to sit down and talk to you." Hearing his words, all six of them were shocked, including the teenager. These words were tantamount to admitting that Dean was stronger than him. The weak needed to be respectful to the strong, but Dean was too young, so there was no need to salute, so it was not rude. "Don't talk to me about age," Dean said. "Otherwise my grandson can be your grandfather." The old man was stunned. He didn't expect Dean to humiliate him so bluntly. He couldn't help but clench his fists. His heart was filled with anger. He gritted his teeth and slowly got up. "Since you want to sit, then sit." Dean pulled out a chair and sat at a comfortable distance away from the table. He leaned on the chair and crossed his legs. At this time, everyone suddenly saw the figure of the woman standing behind him. The latter's face was covered with a black scarf, but a pair of pure black pupils were exposed. Everyone felt a chill as they saw her eyes. It was as if they were being stared at by a pair of extremely ferocious eyes. "What is your name?" Dean asked the old man who was standing next to him. The old man was annoyed as he saw Dudyan's attitude towards his subordinates. "My code name is Shooting Wolf." "Who recommended you to be an elder in the ninth region?" Dean looked into his eyes. Was it the Pope or the elder of the monastery? The old man's face changed as he heard the word Pope. The six people on both sides of the table were shocked, as they had an instinctive, sensitive response to the word. The old man's heart was pounding as he didn't expect Dean to expose his identity. He was indeed the Pope who had used the Holy Church's network to infiltrate the ninth region. He was the highest-level librarian of the Holy Church. Few people in the Holy Church had seen him for many years. It was because of this that the Pope had sent him. It was reasonable to say that no one would be able to see through his identity. He controlled his heartbeat and calmed down. "What Pope?" "I was personally appointed by the chairman." "Do you want to be an elder of the ninth region again? If so, then it's useless to slander me. You have to get the permission of the chairman to be an elder." Dean gently tapped the table. "Come with me to the Holy Church after the meeting. I wanted to see the Pope for many years." The old man's face sank. "What nonsense are you talking about? Do you know who we are? Are you going to the Holy Church? Or are you going to betray the Holy Church? Are you going to ask for rewards from the hypocrites of the Church of Light?" Dean said, "There's only one word in your sentence that is correct." The old man frowned. "What?" asked. Dean said, "I'm going to ask for something." "You." The old man's face was full of anger. "I won't go with you unless you want to die," Dean said. The old man was silent as he felt the killing intent in Dean's words. He thought that his face project was in place. At least he had cleared the suspicion of being a spy. "When you go to the Holy Church, prepare to die." He sneered in his heart. He could not wait for Dean to come to him. Dean didn't pay attention to the old man as he turned to look at the six people. He saw a familiar face. It was Amy, who was imprisoned by him. He didn't expect that the great potion master would come out again. It seemed that the old man had put her in an important position. Dean didn't say anything. Since he was short of manpower at the moment, it would be useful for him to keep her. Amy's heart tightened when she saw Dean looking at her. She quickly lowered her head and didn't dare to look at him. She was afraid that Dean would hold a grudge against her and imprison her again in that dark, dirty dungeon. Everyone, I'll give you 3 days to rule all the branches. Move all the stored money, alchemy, and potions to the headquarters. Dean's expression was calm, but his words were shocking. Everyone was shocked. Gather all the resources to the headquarters? Is he going to rob the entire Ninth Region? Everyone looked at him in amazement. What is this person thinking? Is he crazy? Dean looked at Hawkeye, who was next to him. You are responsible for this. Hawkeye looked at the boy that he hadn't seen for a long time. The familiar feeling in his heart came back again, but this time he felt that the boy was a little different. First, his height had changed. He was taller than before. This was something that the animal glue mask couldn't change. In addition, he felt that the youth was more dangerous than before. There seemed to be a fierce soul hidden under the calm and indifferent face. Hawkeye understands. Hawkeye bowed. He would rather work under Dean than work under the old man Shootwolf. Although he was afraid of Dean, he had an indescribable sense of trust in him. Dean nodded. I'll come back on the day of the elders' meeting. Oh, by the way, I should be wanted by the higher-ups because of my disappearance. Everyone's heart skipped a beat as they heard Dean's words. Dean looked at everyone's reaction as he got the answer. I don't mind if you are interested, but don't affect the things I've told you. Otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences. He turned and walked away. Aisha followed him like a shadow. Sergei let go of his hand and followed Dean. Everyone watched as the 3 of them left. When the sound of their footsteps faded away, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Amy immediately said to Old Man Shooting Wolf, Elder, that scoundrel actually dared to appear again. We should immediately send someone to hunt him down. Old Man, Shilang glanced at her. His gaze slowly swept across the faces of the others. He softly sighed, shook his head, and said, It is impossible to capture and kill this person by relying on the manpower of our Ninth Region. Amy was stunned. If my guess is correct, then his strength has exceeded the hunter level. He is enough to compete with the limitless of the inner wall. The old man slowly said. Everyone was surprised as they heard his words. They didn't expect Dean to be so strong. It was completely beyond their expectations. Amy gritted her teeth. We can use poison. If we can't beat him, then we can use sneak attacks, ambushes, and assassinations. What's the use of strength? Will a strong person dare to swallow the poison I developed? The old man nodded. That's right. But we will leave this person to the other regions. We just need to spread the news about him. That's good. Amy was happy. Dean took Aisha and Sergei out of the town. They rode towards the direction of the castle that was given to them by the Temple of Elements. Master, is that the headquarters of the Dark Church? What do they mean by the Ninth Region? I think the people inside are extraordinary. Sergei couldn't suppress his curiosity as he asked Dean, Do you want to use the power of the Dark Church to fight? Dean replied, Yes. Chapter 605. There is danger in everything, Dean said in a flat tone. So sometimes you have to learn to take advantage of the danger. Sergei was startled. Most people were afraid of danger, so they would avoid danger. Smart people knew how to take precautions. However, the boy in front of him had learned to use danger as his weapon. It was hard to imagine that a boy who was less than 20 years old would have such a mind. He suddenly felt that the mysterious Dark Church was nothing in front of this boy. Although I don't know what he is thinking, but I hope that his plan won't fail. Sergei thought in his heart. Now he and Dean were in the same boat. Now he had provoked a force like the Dark Church. This was not a force that a single aristocrat could match. He couldn't imagine how many lives would be affected if Dean failed. He couldn't imagine how many people around Dean would die without a complete corpse. The night was blurred. Both of them avoided the checkpoints as they moved on the suburban road. They could see the streets were brightly lit. The beautiful nightlife had just begun. Dean pulled the rope of the horse. Aisha sat in front of him and leaned on his arms. Their chests and backs were touching, but the body temperature from Aisha's back was always cold. He felt that Aisha was restless in his arms. This restlessness had been accompanying her ever since they came out from the Dark Church. He He was worried as he whispered in her ear, "Bear with it. After a few days, I'll let you have a good meal." Aisha's restless reaction became more obvious when she heard his words. Her tightly closed red lips slightly opened, revealing two sharp teeth. Dean silently looked at her face. He shook the reins of the horse and sped up. Aisha's restlessness gradually calmed down as they reached the Mosa River. Dean was relieved as he looked up. He pulled the reins of the horse and pointed to a place. "Who are those people?" Sergei rushed behind Dean and saw that there were soldiers patrolling the area. He was angry. "Master, don't be angry. This is the work of the military." 2 months ago, the military had sent people to guard the area. They said that there were evil thieves coming and going, but they didn't go anywhere. They just stayed here and monitored us. Dean understood. No wonder he saw the patrolling soldiers before the curfew time. He asked, "Did you provoke the military?" Sergei replied, "I'm angry because I didn't provoke them. You donated a set of legendary items to the military for free when the barbarians invaded. It helped them to repel the enemy and establish their prestige. Now that you are gone, they turned around and tried to bite back. They are worse than me." Dean's eyes lit up as he sensed a trace of something else. He immediately said, "Abandon the horse and sneak back." "Okay." Sergei dismounted without hesitation. Dean dismounted with Aisha in his arms. They sneaked along the other side of the slope of the Mosa River. He used his thermal vision to scan the surroundings, but didn't see any hidden sentries. It seemed that the surveillance here was relatively loose and no masters were sent over. Knowing this, he was puzzled. Soon, he sneaked back into the castle. With a sweep of his gaze, he saw a few familiar heat sources in the castle. He immediately jumped over the courtyard outside the manor and jumped into the garden lawn. Sergei followed Dean into the garden. He stood up from the grass and said, "Master, there is no surveillance in the yard. We can—" Dean stretched out his hand to stop him and pointed to the ground. Sergei looked down and saw a green line in the grass where his feet landed. He couldn't help but retract his feet and scratched his head. They are too careful. They even set up a trap in their own yard. Dean didn't say anything. He crossed the line and went straight forward. Sergei immediately followed behind him and followed his footsteps. Glenn was leaning on the sofa in the living room. She was bored and yawning. She was thinking about how to torture the disobedient mercenaries tomorrow. Suddenly, she heard a noise from outside. She was surprised. She left the sofa and put on her boots. She appeared at the entrance of the manor. She looked to the left side where the noise came from. She saw a sturdy figure walking in the night. Glenn was relieved after she saw his appearance. "Sergei, how come you are back? Didn't the young master ask you to go outside the giant wall?" Sergei shrugged. "I came back with the young master." "Young master also came back?" Glenn was surprised. "I haven't seen you for a long time." A calm voice sounded from behind Glenn. Glenn was scared. She felt the hair on her body stand up. She jumped back and saw a teenager standing behind her. His hair was a little white. His face was familiar, but also a bit strange. What surprised her the most was that the teenager's left hand was wrapped in a few pieces of cloth. But there were still a few frozen ice thorns protruding out. It seemed as if they were growing on his arm. "Is it really you?" Glenn quickly recovered and said, "Are you okay?" She was in a hurry to take a step forward when she felt a chill coming from behind him. She looked behind Dean, only to see a slender figure standing there with his face covered, like a ghost. Dean nodded and went into the living room. He sat down on the sofa and held Aisha's hand. He pulled her to sit on the sofa. He looked at Glenn, called him down. "I have something to say." "Got it." Glenn's eyes were still on Aisha's body. She frowned as she saw Dean holding her hand intimately. Then she turned and went upstairs. After a moment, sounds of rapid footsteps came from upstairs. "Is the young master back?" "Really? I saw it. It's true." The first one to appear in front of Dean was Nicholas. Although the old man's waist was stooped, but his movements were like the wind. Mason, Zach, Gabriel, and Hecate were behind him. "Young master, you're finally back." Nicholas wasn't wearing any shoes, and his face was full of excitement as he watched him run down the stairs. Dean looked at Noyce's bare feet and nodded to him. He looked at Noyce. Are you okay? Noyce's eyes were wet as he heard Dean's words. He knew the reason behind Dean's greeting. His days were getting worse since Dean disappeared from the dark church. He accidentally overheard the conversation between Hawkeye and a head knight. He knew that Dean was wanted by the higher-ups. He was shocked at that time. He took advantage of the fact that the team prepared by the head commander hadn't come to capture him. He escaped from the dark church that night and sneaked back to the castle. Now that he had restored his identity as Noyce and was hiding in the castle, he wasn't found by the dark church. But these days were somewhat dull and painful. Moreover, he was on tenterhooks every day. He knew that once he fell into the hands of the dark church, his life would be worse than death. Compared to that, Thornflower Prison could be regarded as heaven. I'm fine, Noyce said. Young master, are you okay? You can't go back to the dark church. You are wanted by them. They will arrest you once you go back. It is said that the Dark Parliament has issued this order personally. The Dark Church in the 12 districts will arrest you. Sergei smiled bitterly. You're too late. Noyce was puzzled as he looked at Sergei. Do you know where we came from? Sergei smiled. Have you been there? Noyce's eyes widened. He suddenly thought of something and heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, you weren't discovered. Otherwise, Sergei sighed and said, not only did I go there, I also followed the young master into the headquarters conference room. At that time, there were several people who looked like important people in the meeting. Noyce was dumbfounded and speechless. Dean didn't let them continue to waste time talking. He indifferently said, I remember that I had given you a task 6 months ago. Does anyone remember our purpose 6 months ago? Nicholas' eyelids twitched. Master, you told us to complete our tasks and wait for the opportunity. Are you coming back to? Dean nodded. Yes, I'm ready to unify the outer wall in half a month. All the consortiums and forces will have one name and one master. Glenn, Nicholas, Noyce and others were stunned as they heard his words. Dean didn't give them any buffer time. Everything is ready for this expedition. Don't worry, as this is just an appetizer. You just need to improve your strength every day for the next half a month. Tomorrow I will bring a batch of God's marrows, which will help senior hunters to break through their limits. But before that you must reach the limit of senior hunters. Everyone looked at him in a daze. Gwyneth's silent expression changed as she heard the words God's marrows. She stared at Dean as she quietly clenched her fists. Dean noticed Gwyneth's eyes. Gwyneth, it won't be long before you will be able to accomplish what you always wanted to do. Everyone's eyes looked at Gwyneth. They knew from Sergei that the girl's wish was to return to the inner wall and take revenge on the people who had framed her. Thank you, young master. Gwyneth slightly lowered her head as she bit her lips. She knew that Dean wasn't the boy she knew when they first met. Although God's marrow wasn't a top secret, but only people who had reached a certain level had the right to know about it. Dean nodded slightly as he thought of the patrolling guards outside. What's going on with the guards stationed outside? You already know about it? Glenn was startled. She didn't expect Dean to notice it as soon as he came back. She hesitated for a moment. According to the information I've gathered, it seems that the soldiers are monitoring us. Is it related to the Mel family? Mel family? Dean narrowed his eyes. Glenn said, the superiors of the soldiers are former subordinates of the Mel family. Moreover, the Mel family has moved to the western part of the commercial district and settled down there. It seems that they are ready to restart their development. It's because I'm not here that they are reviving. Dudian nodded as a cold light flashed in his eyes. Nicotine suddenly said, Young master, I am guilty. Please punish me. Finished speaking, he immediately bowed down. Dean frowned. Speak. Nicotine said bitterly, Young master, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to complete the task you gave me before. I have cultivated the mulberry leaves and other plants you asked me to cultivate, but 2 months ago, my plantation was forcefully bought by a group of people. The local land management department actually approved it, so the things you asked me to cultivate are now gone. Dean's eyes flashed. Did the Mel family do it? Nicholas felt Dudian's anger and nervously replied, Master, I have checked, and it is indeed related to the Mel family. Dean coldly looked at him. Didn't you ask old Feline for help? Cold sweat overflowed from Nicotine's back. Master, I did, but old Feline was ill and refused to visit. I couldn't. Dean's face sank, and his eyes were as gloomy as water. Are you really sick, or are you making an excuse to not see me? Nicotine replied, He's really sick. I've checked, and the doctor who treated old Feline said that old Feline was infected with black spots. He won't live for long. The killing intent in Dean's eyes dissipated a lot. He nodded and said, You are indeed guilty. Nicotine's heart skipped a beat, and he hurriedly knelt down. Please punish me, young master. Since you've already done your best, I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself. Dean indifferently said, I'm asking you, are the plants still there after the land was sold? Yes. Nicholas busily said, Mel family doesn't know what those things are for. But looking at such a large area of planting, they think that there is a way, so they didn't destroy them. Instead, they continued to plant them. All the workers I hired at that time stayed. That's good. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. In that case, now you gather people and take back that place. Now, Nicotine was stunned. Chapter 606. Nicotine's scalp tightened as he saw Du Dian's anger. Master, it's not difficult to take back the cultivation base. But we can't deal with the Mel family. Unless you can restore your previous identity, the Mel family can use a little bit of their connections to arrest us on the charge of seizing the land. In my opinion, Mel family is worried that they won't be able to punish us. If we forcibly seize the base at this time, then most of us will be caught by them. Mason was angry as he heard his words. Seizing the land? It's obvious that they robbed us. How dare they complain? Nicholas tilted his head to look at him and sighed. This kind of thing, isn't it normal? Macon was even more angry. It's because you think so you condone this kind of thing. Nicotine was speechless. He wanted to refute, but felt that there was some truth in Mason's words. He couldn't help but sigh. Dean's finger gently touched the leather armrest of the sofa. You can handle this matter. Mel family won't intervene in this matter. Nicholas was slightly taken aback, looking at him suspiciously. Won't interfere? Why? Are you going to come out personally? It's a bit inappropriate. You don't have the identity of the master of the temple, so the Mel family won't make a concession so easily. I have my own way. Dean waved his hand. You don't have to worry about it. Nicotine felt strange as he looked at Dean. He saw that the boy was very calm and seemed to have a plan. He was curious in his heart. He had tried all the ways he could think of, but there was no way to solve this matter. Dean and Mel family were mortal enemies. Even if there were great benefits, it would be difficult to stop the Mel family. After all, no one would sit back and wait for the enemy to grow up and annihilate them. However, since Dean had said so, he could only do as he was told. Dean indifferently said after Nicholas left, Glenn, Sergei, Gwyneth, the three of you come with me. The three of them were startled, but immediately obeyed. Dean looked at Noyce. You stay in guard. Yes, young master. Noyce nodded respectfully. Dean immediately got up and stepped out of the castle. Aisha followed him like a shadow. Young master, this is? Glenn couldn't help but ask as she saw Aisha following closely behind Dean. There was an inexplicable feeling of panic in her heart. Du Dian indifferently said, You don't have to know and don't care. Just don't get close to her. Although she is very gentle, but she hates strangers. If you get close to her, be careful of losing your life. The three of them were startled. Did Dean's words mean that the girl had the ability to kill them? Although they felt that the girl was extraordinary, but they knew that they were at the top of the outer wall. There were many people who could defeat them, but there were only a few who could kill them. Gwyneth stared at the back of the mysterious girl for a while. She felt that she had seen this girl before, but she couldn't remember where. She quickly recovered her thoughts and asked Du Dian, Where are we going now? Mel family. Du Dian said. The three of them were stunned. Dean came out of the castle and walked along the Tiza River. Sergei was about to remind Dean to avoid the surveillance of the soldiers. However, he saw that Dean was heading towards the location of the soldiers. His heart skipped a beat as he faintly guessed something. Dean took the lead and came to the barracks across the river. 7 or 8 soldiers were barbecuing, eating, and drinking around a campfire. There were several empty beer barrels on the ground. "Boy, go away. This isn't a place you can come to," one of the patrolling soldiers shouted at Dadian. He was nervous as he had noticed Dadian leaving the castle, especially Sergei, Glenn, and the others. He was very familiar with them. He didn't know why they were here in the middle of the night. Dean raised his hand and said in a cold voice, "Kill." The 3 of them were startled, but quickly reacted. Gwyneth was the first to understand Dean's meaning. She took the lead and rushed out. She turned the dagger in her hand and pierced the neck of the soldier, who shouted at Dean. The soldier was just an ordinary soldier. He was killed before he could react. Sergei and Glenn acted quickly. In the blink of an eye, all the soldiers who were resting by the fire or sleeping in the tents were killed by the 3 of them. None of them were left alive. The 3 of them came back to Dean after killing all the soldiers. Glenn's face was ugly as she looked at Dean. "Master, I'm afraid that the military won't give up after we killed them. I'm the one who won't give up." Dean's eyes were cold. He was about to turn around and leave when he felt a burst of restlessness and killing intent coming from behind. He quickly turned around to avoid it. Whoosh! A gust of cold wind rushed out and pounced on the body of a soldier on the ground. It was Aisha who was following behind Dean. This shocking scene made Sergei and the other 2 completely stunned. When they saw Haisha biting the soldier's neck, the 3 widened their eyes and looked at this scene incredulously. Dean's face changed. There was a trace of heartache and anger in his eyes. He stepped forward and grabbed Aisha's shoulder to stop her from biting. "Don't be like this. You don't deserve to touch such garbage. You have to endure it." He snapped his fingers twice. Aisha stopped biting as she heard the snapping sound. Her mouth twitched, and her body seemed to be trembling. Dadian knew that she was trying her best to endure. He kicked away the soldier's body in her arms and picked her up. He turned and left. He put Aisha on the ground when he reached the open space far away from the soldier's body. Aisha seemed to have calmed down and wasn't as restless as before. Dean was relieved. He turned to look at Glenn and the other 2. He frowned as he saw the shocked look on their faces. "It's best not to leak out what you saw here." Sergei came back to his senses and quickly nodded to keep his mouth shut. He finally understood why he felt palpitations from the girl. She was by no means an ordinary girl. Chapter 607. Glenn, Gwyneth, and Sergei subconsciously stayed a few meters behind Dean as they saw the scene of Aisha eating the corpses of the soldiers. They didn't dare to get too close to Aisha. They had seen countless ferocious people, but they had never seen such a bloodthirsty and cruel person. From the previous scene, it seemed that even Dean might not be able to completely suppress the girl. The 3 of them kept silent as if nothing had happened. Dean stopped and looked at Glenn. "How many mercenaries have you gathered?" Glenn didn't know why Dadian was asking this question, but she truthfully reported, "Due to the fear of attracting the attention of the military and other forces, we have been secretly recruiting in the last 6 months. The number of mercenaries is not much. There are nearly 8,000 ordinary mercenaries, 70 primary hunters, 7 intermediate hunters, 2 senior hunters." Dean didn't wait for her to finish. "I'll give you half an hour to gather them at the square." Glenn was startled. "Master, I'm afraid that half an hour. Don't gather them all. Gather as many as you can." "Yes." Glenn was relieved. She looked at Dean. "Should I go?" Dean nodded. Glenn immediately excused herself and turned around, her figure disappearing into the night. Dean took Sergei and Gwyneth to the rendezvous point after Glenn left. Half an hour passed. By the time Dean and others arrived at the square, thousands of figures had gathered in the relatively remote square. They were standing scattered in the square and whispering to each other. Dean frowned as he saw the noisy scene. "Is this your management?" Gwyneth, who was standing next to Sergei, knew that Dean was talking to her. She slowly stepped forward. "I'll reorganize." She saw that Dean didn't respond. It seemed that he acquiesced. She left and came to the front of the square. Her clear voice spread through the audience. "Silence. Hundreds of people in front of the square heard Gwyneth's voice and immediately stopped their discussion and became quiet. The people further behind were still whispering, but soon they noticed something strange in front of them, so they gradually stopped talking and stood on tiptoe to look ahead. "Greetings, Head Gwyneth." 3 figures came out of the crowd and respectfully said to Gwyneth. Gwyneth said in a cold voice, "Order everyone to line up and wait for orders." The 3 respectfully replied, "Yes." He turned around and returned to the crowd. A moment later, a dozen or so figures flashed through the crowd. The originally loose crowd was led by these dozen or so people, and one after another, they formed a huge square. At this time, footsteps came from outside the square. It was Glenn who was leading a team of hundreds of people. The originally noisy square instantly quieted down. The passers-by who saw such a scene immediately moved away in fright, not daring to approach. Gwyneth quickly returned to Dean. "Master, the reorganization is complete. We are waiting for your command." Dean said, "Pass the order on my behalf. Everyone will follow us to battle. Tonight, we will wash the Mel family with blood." Gwyneth's heart skipped a beat. She didn't dare to neglect and immediately replied, "Yes." Sergei's face slightly changed as he heard Dean's words. It was obvious that this wasn't a simple demonstration. Tonight, there would be a storm of blood which would alarm the entire outer wall. There was a trace of worry in his heart. It wouldn't be difficult to capture the Mel family with their strength. But the real trouble would be after the capture. After all, the Mel family was an ancient aristocratic family with a wide network in the outer wall. Whether it was the army or the Holy Church, there were members of the family who held high power. As long as they instigated the other forces to attack the Mel family. Sergei looked at Dean's back. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. But then he thought that the youth was different from him. Although he was young and frivolous, but he was more patient and cunning than an 80-year-old fox. He wasn't an impulsive person. Sergei's heart slowly calmed down as he thought of this. Gwyneth returned to the front of the square as Sergei was lost in his thoughts. "Everyone, tonight I will massacre the Mel family. We will go to war immediately." Sergei's voice was clear and loud. The passers-by in the distance heard her voice and ran away in fright. All the mercenaries were stunned, but they quickly became excited. They shouted in unison, and their auras were strong. Glenn returned to Dean's side. "Master, time is pressing. I can only gather these people. I don't know if it's enough." "It's enough," Dean said. "Inform Gwyneth and let her lead the team to follow us. We will go first." Glenn was startled. "You want to go first?" Dean didn't answer as he turned and left. Sergei was startled, but immediately followed behind him. Crowtown, Mel family. Crowtown was famous for its seafood in the western part of the commercial district. There was a famous lake called Blue Lake. The Blue Lake was wide and clear. There were many delicious and rare fish in it. The people who lived in this town had been fishing for generations. Fishing skills had been passed down for hundreds of years. There was a saying that the people of Crowtown could swim if they could walk. This saying described the innate ability of the people of Crowtown to swim. There were 3 most conspicuous buildings in the center of the town. The first one was the praying church of the Holy Church. The second one was the castle of the Victor family. The third one was the newly built castle of the Mel family. Few people knew that the Victor family and the Mel family were distant relatives. The ancestors of the Victor family had intermarried. But later on, the Victor family declined and the Mel family severed their relationship. Now the 2 families were united again. "Miss Shaya, the tuna in our Blue Lake salt pond will be in harvest season in 3 months. According to the previous income, we can get at least 100,000 gold coins this year. We can use these 100,000 gold coins to recruit soldiers and train hunters. It will be enough to help you make a comeback." A middle-aged man wearing a black suit said, while sitting at the other end of the table. He was sitting at the other end of the table. The table was very long. It was 6 meters long. Fortunately, the hall was extremely quiet, so that his voice could reach the other end of the table. Sarah smiled and raised her glass. "My grandfather and father won't forget your kindness." In the future, when the Mel family returns to the inner wall, we will bring your Victor family. The middle-aged man's eyes lit up. He immediately raised his cup and said with a smile, Miss Saya, you're being too polite. Your father has given birth to such a beautiful and intelligent daughter. It's really enviable. Come. The wine glass was slightly lifted. Although it was 6 meters away, the level of the glass was accurately controlled under the mouth of Sarah's glass. Sarah Mel indifferently smiled and said, When I was young, my grandfather often said that he would take me to Wugang Town. He said that the scenery here is beautiful and the seafood is delicious. It's a most suitable place to live and retire. Now that I finally have the opportunity to come here, seeing is believing. I heard that Blackport Town had reached an agreement with the military many years ago to cancel the conscription in Blackport. Mr. James is indeed a wise landlord. James chuckled and said, Not at all. This is all done by my father. The old man has already retired, and he's been feeling unwell recently. He's been talking about visiting old Mr. George, but it's a pity that the journey is long and he has a chronic illness. It's really a pity. There will be opportunities in the future. Sarah Mel smiled. Mr. James, your family has been managing this town for generations and has won the hearts of the people. Why don't you go a step further and rent the passage and apply for military power? James shook his head and sighed. I think so too, but my father is too stubborn. He wants to stay in this town and enjoy his old age. I can't do anything about it. But if I can go back to the inner wall, then I will have fulfilled my father's wish for many years. Sarah nodded. It's my father's wish to return to the inner wall. In the past, our Mel family and your Victor family were expelled from the inner wall because they violated the rules. So many years have passed. My grandfather, my father, and my grandfather's wish is to return to the inner wall and get the title of nobility. There was a trace of indignation in her voice. The Mellon Consortium, which was run by our family, has found an opportunity to return to the inner wall. But that damn despicable person framed our family and caused us to go bankrupt. Otherwise, our Mel family and Mr. James would have returned to the inner wall. James quietly looked at her and smiled. There will always be opportunities. Miss Sarah doesn't need to be angry. It's getting late, so I'll take my leave first. We'll talk tomorrow. Sarah immediately put away the indignation on her face. I'll see you off. Miss Sarah is too polite. James got up and left. He was accompanied by Sarah as they left the Mel family's castle. They returned to the neighboring castle of the Victor family. Looking at James' figure disappearing into the night, Sarah's innocent smile immediately disappeared. Her eyes were cold. Damn thing. A mere 100,000 gold coins, and he wants to board the ship? In his dreams. Miss, is the Victor family still willing to pay 100,000 gold coins? A short-haired maid frowned. Sarah coldly replied, That village fisherman is short-sighted. Now our Mel family is in trouble. If he really wants to help, then we will remember his kindness. Humph. A mere 100,000 gold coins, and he wants to ask for a favor. If it wasn't for the fact that our industry hasn't been unsealed, then I wouldn't even bother to accept such a small amount of money. Mrs. Wright, the maid respectfully replied. Sarah retracted her gaze and looked at her. The coldness in her eyes suddenly disappeared. There was a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Lisa, you're the only one who won't leave me. No matter what happens, I won't leave Mississippi, Lisa whispered. Sarah Mel smiled and took her hand. Let's go inside. Yes, Mississippi, Lisa nodded. Both of them went back to the room on the second floor. The servants who saw them respectfully bowed their heads and stared at their toes. They didn't dare to peek. Sarah took Lisa into the room and immediately closed the door. She was about to turn around when suddenly an indifferent voice echoed from the room. I didn't expect that the wise and arrogant Miss Mel is actually a lesbian. Sarah Mel turned around and angrily said, Who is it? As soon as the words left his mouth, he saw 3 figures on the sofa in the main hall of the room. 2 of them were standing, and 1 of them was sitting. The person who was sitting had his legs crossed and was leaning on the sofa in an extremely comfortable position. He had a head of black hair and an icy expression. There was not a hint of a smile on his face, but his indifferent eyes seemed to constantly reveal a hint of ridicule. After Sarah saw the man's face, the anger on her face faded like a tide. Her pink cheeks instantly turned pale. Her hands trembled as she slowly moved to her back. She regretted closing the door so eagerly. "Bring it over," Dean indifferently said as he saw Sarah's small movements. Carl, who was standing on the side, grinned. His figure flashed and appeared in front of the two. Just as he was about to grab Sarah, suddenly a palm attack came. It was Lisa. Her speed was incomparably fast. She wasn't an ordinary maid. He was slightly surprised. He saw that Sarah had quickly grabbed the handle of the door. She was ready to open the door and call for help. He suddenly felt annoyed. He punched Lisa's palm. Lisa's soft palm pressed against Lisa's chest. Her body hit the door. He took the opportunity to quickly pinch Sarah and Lisa's shoulders. He brought them in front of Dean. Sarah covered her shoulder and screamed in pain. Lisa hurried to support her. "Miss, are you okay?" Sarah bit her lips and stared at Dean in anger. "Why are you here? What do you want to do?" "I'm telling you that this is the Black Harbor town. It's a town under the protection of the military. If you kill me, then the military and the Holy Church will investigate this matter. Our Mel family is in dire straits, but we are still a noble family. Not everyone can invade us." "Invade?" There was a trace of malice in Dean's indifferent eyes. He looked at Sergei. "Don't you like beauties? Do you like this beauty?" Sergei looked at Sarah and shook his head. "I don't like a snake or a scorpion. I'm not asking you to marry her. I'm asking you to have sex with her." Dean snapped. Sergei scratched his head. "That's not a problem." "No." Lisa suddenly got up and looked at Dean. "Even if I die, I won't let you hurt Mississippi." Dean looked at her familiar face. The killing intent in his eyes became stronger. "I haven't seen you for a long time, Lisa. Have you forgotten me?" Lisa coldly replied, "Of course I won't forget. We are both from a Maischen orphanage. Let's go if you remember the old affection. I'll promise you anything as long as you let go of Miss." "No," Sarah flatly said. Dean indifferently said, "Remember the old affection? You wanted to harm me when I was adopted. You said that I was mute and wanted to take away the adopter. Now it seems that your wish has come true. I didn't expect that after all these years, you would climb to the position of the famous Miss of Mel family from an orphan adopted by a gardener. Sure enough, I didn't misjudge you at that time. You always have a good future if you have a bad heart." Lisa's face turned ugly. "You should know that it's all about ability to be adopted." "Yes." Dean nodded. "I agree. So if you want to live, it's all about ability." "You." Lisa clenched her teeth in anger. Dean got up and said, "Let's tie them up first. We'll give the beautiful Miss Sarah a surprise." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. "What are you going to do? Are you crazy? We are nobles." Chapter 608. Sarah bit her lips. Indeed, the Mel family was one of the ancient aristocrats in the commercial district. But like other aristocrats in the commercial district, they weren't conferred the title of nobility. Their status in the household register was just aristocrat. Sarah felt a sense of shame as she looked at the contempt in Dean's indifferent eyes. She gritted her teeth. "Even if we aren't conferred the title of nobility, we are still aristocrats. Once we return to the inner wall, we will be conferred the title of nobility. If other aristocrats know that you have treated us like this, then they will jointly put you on the wanted list. If you leave now, then I will act as if nothing has happened. I promise you in the name of the Mel family." Dean sneered. "Aristocrat? It's just a dog of a real aristocrat. Do you want to know who your grandfather is? I'll tell you after we finish our business." After saying that, he stepped between the two of them and left without looking back. Sarah was startled. She looked back at Dean. Her beautiful cheeks were twisted in anger as she screamed, "Untouchable! You slum, untouchable!" Bang! Sergei quickly made a move and knocked her out with a karate chop, and then turned his hand to the maid Lisa. Lisa hurriedly raised her hand to block, but this time Sergei was prepared. He easily avoided her attack and chopped her neck. She immediately fainted. "You stay here and look after them. Dean opened the door and threw out a sentence. Sergei was startled. "Don't you need my help?" Dean didn't answer as he went out of the door. The maid outside the corridor saw Dean come out of the room. She was stunned for a moment and immediately shouted at him. Dean gently rubbed and snapped his fingers. Aisha's expressionless face suddenly woke up. Her deep and emotionless eyes shot out two bloodthirsty rays of light. She suddenly flew out. In an instant, mournful screams rang out from the corridor and echoed back to the room with its slightly open door. When Sergei heard the scream of fear, he suddenly felt a chill spread throughout his body. It was as if there were evil spirits coming out of the slightly open door, turning the world into purgatory. Blood splashed on the walls on both sides of the corridor. Dean walked quietly, leaving behind the bodies of the maids. At the same time, a figure covered in blood followed behind Dean. The two of them walked down the bloody corridor step by step. Their alloy boots stepped on the wooden stairs, making creaking sounds. The screams on the second floor had already agitated the guards in the castle. When Dean came to the stairs, more than a dozen figures wearing knight armors engraved with the Mel family's emblem rushed into the hall on the first floor. They were holding spears and swords. They looked up the stairs and saw the unfamiliar face of Dean. At the same time, they also saw the back of Dean's hair was somewhat messy and his chin was dripping with blood. The knights were stunned for a moment before they immediately charged forward. One of them recognized Dean and exclaimed out loud, "Whoosh!" Aisha didn't wait for the knights to rush to the stairs as she smelled the smell of blood. She was like a purple phantom as she instantly rushed into the team of knights and tore a gap. She moved like lightning, her sharp nails easily piercing through the hard armors of the knights, like a wolf in a flock of sheep. In an instant, 4 or 5 knights were sent flying, and the other 2 knights were caught in her hands. They struggled in horror, but were unable to break free. Dean noticed that although Aisha had the same bloodthirsty characteristics as the undead, but there was a big difference in her attacks. She knew how to avoid the sharp spearhead of the knight's spear. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be that she still retained part of her consciousness as a human? This discovery made him a little excited. He felt that this was the biggest surprise of the night. Soon, the knights who rushed into the hall were killed by Aisha. The undead's attack pattern was to attack living creatures first instead of catching them and biting them. When the knights were slaughtered, Aisha's bloodthirsty eyes suddenly turned to the maids, housekeepers, maids, and other servants in the hall. These people had long been scared to the point that their legs were soft. They trembled and stayed in the same place. Seeing Aisha rush over, these people seemed to forget to escape. They just stood in the same place and looked at her pleadingly. Fear was engraved in their eyes. Tears flowed down their cheeks, but there was no sound of crying. Aisha's ferocious face was reflected in the eyes of these people. She didn't show the slightest mercy. She cut off the head, pierced through the chest, or twisted the head off. Her attacks were all fatal. She was extremely bloody and brutal. Dean saw this scene. He didn't feel that it was too bloody. Instead, his eyes lit up. He noticed that Aisha's attack pattern was different from ordinary undead. She was like a veteran hunter who clearly knew the flaws and weaknesses of the prey. Maybe there is hope for her consciousness to recover. His mind was full of such thoughts. His eyes were full of hope. He only felt that the screams of fear in his ears had become particularly pleasant. "What's the matter?" Meanwhile, a middle-aged man that wore a hunter armor flashed over swiftly from outside the hall, and he'd just arrived at the hall when he spoke in a loud voice. He'd only spoken halfway when he clearly noticed the scene within the hall. Internal organs were scattered all over the ground while blood flowed into rivers, and it was like a bloody hell. He was stunned. In the next moment, he felt a chill coming from his left side. He turned his head stiffly and immediately saw an excited and ferocious, beautiful face. His pupils rapidly widened. Puff! His head was immediately sent flying, and thick blood gushed out from his neck like a fountain. His body fell straight down. Dean glanced at the middle-aged man's armor. It turned out to be a senior hunter. He didn't expect that the Mel family that he had defeated could not only recover in such a short time, but also win over a senior hunter. After killing the middle-aged man, Aisha suddenly smelled something and immediately rushed out of the hall. Dean immediately jumped down the stairs and quickly followed. As soon as he got out of the hall, Dean heard a burst of neat footsteps and the sound of armors rubbing. Soon, a group of knights and squires rushed out of the building in the left corner of the castle outside the hall. These people just came out of the left corner of the castle. Aisha took the initiative to greet them. The bloody massacre immediately reappeared, and blood-curdling screams rang out continuously. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.